Amidst the ruins of a cosmic battlefield, a lone, white-haired man desperately unleashes a final pulse of energy. His spell forms into a single pleading word that echoes across the void. Reply. A desperate magical message broadcasts into the silence, seeking any other survivors. The white-haired man pours his remaining strength into the spell, searching for a sign of life. As visions of his fallen comrades flash by, he expands his plea, asking for any response, even from those who cannot speak. He begs for any sign of life, a movement, a noise, as more dead allies are shown. With a final, desperate burst of power, the man sends his plea across the desolate landscape. His spell meets only silence, and he realizes with crushing despair that he is the only one left. A flashback introduces the menacing horned demon lord who first united the demons. The demon's brutal conquest is shown, with one warrior brandishing a spear over his terrified victims. This demon lord, with his armies, was the one who led humanity to the brink of collapse. A title is revealed for the fallen hero, the High Priest. A baby cries in terror as a horrific demon looms over it, ready to devour the infant. The High Priest calmly watches, chanting a mysterious spell to intervene. The baby is suddenly pulled into a swirling blue vortex of magical energy. Enveloped in a protective green aura, the baby is saved while chaos rages in the background. The gentle, glowing green energy solidifies, ensuring the infant's safety. A dark-haired woman catches the crying baby, securing it from harm. In a memory, the High Priest stands proudly as the leader of the White Tower's mages. With a furious cry, the High Priest unleashes a massive, world-altering spell. The horned demon lord and his forces are engulfed and annihilated by the High Priest's overwhelming power. Having unleashed his final attack, the High Priest's body begins to dissolve into pure light. Back in the present, a green-haired woman with horns appears before the dying High Priest, confirming his death. The High Priest recognizes the newcomer, whispering her name, Edna. She is revealed to be Edna Sol Laplace, the world's last dragon and the observer of history. Edna, addressing the Mage Tower Master, offers good and bad news. He asks to hear the bad news first. She reports the devastating outcome. The Mage Tower is nearly destroyed, its resources incinerated, and most mages are dead. The High Priest asks for the good news, and Edna informs him that Imperial forces saved his surviving disciples. Cough. Cough. Relieved but fatally wounded, the High Priest listens as Edna asks if he regrets his sacrifice. He firmly states he has no regrets, as he chose his people and cannot dishonor their memory. Looking at his bloody hand, the dying High Priest asks if she has anything else to say. As his final request, he asks Edna to look after his young, anxious disciples. With a slight nod and a soft laugh, Edna agrees to his wish. The High Priest marvels at a dragon bowing to a human, but Edna insists he has earned the right. Edna vows that she and the continent will never forget the heroic sacrifices made by the White Tower. She begins to conclude their conversation as the High Priest weakens further. He accepts her promise with grim satisfaction, acknowledging that their sacrifice should indeed be remembered. He recalls his guiding principle. He would become a villain if it meant protecting his people. A fond memory shows him smiling warmly, surrounded by his 3 adoring disciples. Back in the present, the High Priest's life finally gives out as his hand falls limp. Covering his eyes one last time, he passes away at the recorded moment of 3:47 p.m. As a shooting star crosses the sky, an official message confirms the death of the Mage Tower Master, Oscar Sage. A quill records the devastating losses of the White Tower, listing its mages and master, Oscar Sage, among the deceased. The record is finalized as the words "killed in action" are stamped beside Oscar Sage's name. A single green leaf, a remnant of Edna's presence, drifts down towards the majestic White Tower. The leaf finds a window where a blue-haired disciple tends to his sick, dark-haired comrade, Hyuk. As the leaf lands, the dark-haired disciple jolts awake from a deep slumber. He flails wildly, knocking a bowl of water all over the startled blue-haired disciple. The blue-haired disciple complains about being soaked, while the newly awakened man looks around in utter confusion. The blue-haired disciple scolds him for his nasty sleeping habits, but the dark-haired disciple questions the phrase, realizing he wasn't merely sleeping. The newly awakened man clutches his chest, shocked to have been so defenseless, but a more important realization dawns. He recalls his final moments with absolute clarity, remembering the fatal wound that should have killed him. A flashback confirms his identity. He is the horned demon lord, and he clearly recalls being slain by the high priest. Boom! His spiraling confusion is cut short as the room's door is violently blasted open. Ack! A furious, blonde-haired man stands in the doorway's wreckage, startling the blue-haired disciple. The blue-haired disciple, Frank, tries to restrain the enraged elder, who vows to beat some sense into the patient. The elder smirks, taunting the patient about how fascinating it is that he is still alive. The man calmly sits up and demands an explanation, an arrogant tone that stuns the elder. Explain? The elder's eyes glow with rage. Infuriated by the sheer audacity of the command, he lunges forward, shouting that the patient should be begging for his life, not giving orders. The demon lord's instincts kick in as he prepares to counter what he assumes is a demonic assassination attempt. He instantly conjures a windshield to defend against the incoming attack. The spell is designed not just to block, but to use the force of the attack to snap the opponent's wrist. He condescendingly dismisses his attacker as a low-level scrub who couldn't possibly anticipate such a move. But to his absolute shock, the powerful windshield begins to flicker and fade away. He stares at his hands in horror, wondering what happened to his magic as the spell fails completely. The elder mockingly compliments the pretty good shield, sarcastically noting that he wasn't just faking his weakness. Postponing disciplinary action for embezzlement, the elder orders the patient to focus on recovering and promptly leaves. Frank scolds him for provoking the elder, while the man stares at his hands, bewildered by his magical impotence. He assesses his new body, disgusted to find that his mana circuits, quantity, and purity are all pathetic. What happened to my body, he screams in his mind, desperate for an answer. He whirls around and demands the date from Frank, who tiredly tells him it's September 21st. He calculates that 5 months have passed since his death, but Frank corrects him, insisting it has only been 1 day. Dismissing Frank's words, he commands him to summon his old disciples, Lloyd, Gilly, or Shasha, for a proper report. Frank, suspecting amnesia, calls the disciples traitors and asks why he is speaking the Tower Master's name so informally. When Frank explains that Lloyd defected and Jalal became a thief, the man erupts in fury, defending their honor. He instinctively checks for magical deception, but finds none. Frank is telling the horrifying truth. He tries to process the news, asking how a 5-year-old like Shasha could possibly become the Tower Master. Why leave out the 20 before that? Frank asks, completely baffled by the nonsensical question. He scoffs at the idea, prompting Frank to ask why Oscar Sage is getting so mad at a child's words. The man pauses, realizing that Frank's unbelievable story was spoken with unnerving sincerity. He turns to the window and, for the first time, truly sees his reflection. A wave of panic hits him as he grabs his hair, not recognizing the young face staring back. "Who are you?" he screams internally, finally understanding this body is not his own. After a moment, he accepts the impossible truth. This is the world, 20 years after he died. Looking out the window, he marvels at the peaceful, thriving city that has risen from the ashes. He takes in the new sights of a modern world, from glowing streetlights to automated cars. He credits the magic engineering revolution for this progress, sadly wishing his comrades could have seen this future. He touches the glass, contrasting this bright new era with the hopeless despair of the war-torn past. Setting aside his memories, he resolves to focus on his new reality, learning about the owner of this body. He learns the body belongs to Oscar Crusian, a pathetically weak 20-year-old mage from a fallen noble family. The assessment is grim. Being only a level 1 mage at age 20 is truly a mark of incompetence. He deduces that in a desperate bid for power, Oscar embezzled funds to buy an illegal elixir and collapsed. He understood the gamble. Success meant a massive mana boost, while failure meant certain death. Recalling Frank's words, he realizes Oscar should have died from a mana outburst, making his survival unnatural. Suddenly, his eyes widen with a jolt of realization as he senses something new. Focusing his senses, he discovers the body is brimming with a shocking amount of mana for a level 1 mage. It's a vast reserve of pure, unrefined mana, a surprisingly successful result from the cheap illegal elixir. As he examines the raw energy, he spots a tiny speck of dark, corrupted mana within the pure source. What is this? He wonders aloud, as the mysterious, dark impurity drifts toward his outstretched hand. A single, dark drop of corruption emerges from the tip of his finger. The dark impurity drips down, tainting the vast pool of pure mana below. Sizzle! The drop lands on his hand and he instantly recognizes it as poison. He clutches his hand, wondering why such a substance would be in this body. A smirk crosses his face as he confidently declares he now understands the situation. He deduces that the illegal elixir was not a hoax, but a genuine, priceless potion. The memory of the shimmering, ornate elixir bottle confirms its high quality. Analyzing the remaining poison and time frame, he realizes the body's previous owner didn't die from a mana outburst. Instead, a more sinister truth is revealed. The cause of death was poison. He contemplates the mystery, noting the poison was far too potent for a mere level 1 mage. He lets out a quiet, thoughtful hum, intrigued by the unfolding plot. Rising from his chair, he concludes that someone is playing games with his soul. He picks up the empty elixir bottle, examining it closely. Seeing his new face reflected in the glass, he notes this isn't a bad start to his new life. He finally states the name of the body's original owner, Oscar Crusian. He smiles, holding the bottle that served as both a poison and a catalyst. As payment for borrowing his body, he vows to avenge the fallen Oscar Crusian. The chapter concludes with a haunting image of Oscar, his resolve hardening. In the outskirts of Siren, a man runs to deliver news about a store. A man in a brown jacket corrects his subordinate to call him boss before asking what happened. The subordinate reports a mage completely wrecked the store, enraging the boss. The subordinate suspects Oscar Crusian, but the boss scoffs, dismissing him as a weak theory mage, incapable of such destruction. When the subordinate worries about a White Tower investigation, the boss reminds him who ordered the hit on Oscar. He reveals the client was a White Tower mage, identifiable by the ring he wore. As they marvel at the client's audacity, they are startled by a sudden presence and demand to know who's there. The door swings open to reveal Oscar Crusian, now dressed in an elegant white and black robe. Oscar explains he tracked them using the bottle's scent, musing that this is more complicated than he thought. The boss demands to know if he destroyed the store, and Oscar calmly confirms he did. The boss scoffs, irritated that Oscar overheard their discussion, but Oscar insists they continue it. Enraged, the subordinate, Bart, lunges forward with a dagger to silence him permanently. With a flick of his wrist, Oscar unleashes a wind cutter spell. The wind magic swirls around him as he effortlessly evades the incoming blade. The magical blade slices cleanly through Bart, instantly decapitating him. TSK, Oscar notes with disappointment that only the head was cut off, reminding him of the high priest. The boss screams in horror at his fallen subordinate. Bart, in a panic, the boss draws a pistol and fires at Oscar. The bullets speed through the air, aimed directly at Oscar's head. He watches with mild amusement as the bullets stop, just inches from his face. He examines the projectiles, intrigued that he can't detect any mana in them. Smirking at the boss's shock, he asks if these primitive things are called bullets. With a flick of his fingers, he takes control of the suspended bullets. The bullets reverse course and slam back into the boss who fired them. Oscar pins the wounded boss to the floor, informing him that all sound is blocked from leaving the room. The boss is aghast that a level 1 mage could cast silence, but Oscar corrects him, explaining he used a simpler soundbind spell. Taking a seat, Oscar calmly demands to know who hired them to harm him. The boss refuses to answer, earning a brutal kick to the face for his defiance. Oscar mockingly compliments his pride, finding it amusingly misplaced. With a cold stare, Oscar's hand glows as he prepares a more persuasive method. AGHHHH. The boss convulses on the floor, screaming in agony under magical torture. Oscar sighs that he dislikes torture because it's noisy, and once again demands answers. HRGH pinned under Oscar's boot, the boss breaks, begging him to stop and promising to reveal everything. Oscar calmly removes his foot and demands to know everything about the man's patron. Hutha. The boss explains they were given the elixir by a mysterious patron and forced to sell it. Then Oscar asks for a description. The man recalls a hooded figure whose face was hidden, but he was certain the person wore a White Tower ring. Oscar dismisses the ring as a simple deception, but the boss suddenly recalls another clue, the patron's scent. He describes the only other detail he remembers, a unique and refreshing scent of clear mint. Filing away the mint scent as a useful clue, Oscar questions their plan, learning they banked on the White Tower being too distracted to investigate. Wait. Oscar is stunned by this news, demanding to know what he means by the White Tower's withdrawal. baffling the informant. Oscar bluffs that the elixir affected his memory, and the terrified man finally caves, agreeing to hand over the relevant documents. As Oscar watches patiently, the wounded boss gets to work writing down everything he knows. The man presents the documents, including the payment from the mysterious client, which Oscar accepts. He begins reviewing the information, starting with the documents detailing the current state of the White Tower. The document details how the White Tower has fallen from grace since his sacrifice, now facing a critical announcement from the imperial family. He's stunned to learn the tower lacks advanced magic, remembering he gave Edna documents to prevent this, and reads on. The report outlines the Golden Tower's contributions, which include creating revolutionary street lamps and cars. Next, he reads that the Blue Tower of the South now dominates the market for drinking water, agriculture, and potions. The Red Tower of the West has become a military force, assisting in missions like monster subjugation. After learning of the other tower's success, he asks about the White Tower's role in this new world. The answer leaves him speechless. The White Tower now does delivery. He face palms in utter disbelief as the man explains, the White Tower's delivery service is valued for its speed and safety. He latches onto the word riders, completely unfamiliar with the concept, as reality sets in. He remembers how the White Tower's mages once ruled the skies, a symbol of freedom and bravery. Sigh, he asks who could have possibly approved such a ridiculous business, and learns it was the current tower master. He questions why the Blue Tower is handling water and agriculture, when potions should be the most profitable venture for any magic tower. A grim thought surfaces. The White Tower was once the leader of the potion market, before all its methods were lost in the fire. The man clarifies that the water business is lucrative, involving selling clean water and providing rain for a price. Oscar is baffled by the idea of buying clean water, which the man explains is a new trend among the wealthy. He scoffs at the idea, calling them clowns for selling something as common as well water, making the man laugh nervously. To sum things up, the White Tower is failing, and the upcoming festival in 7 months is their last chance to prove their worth. Q. The boss suddenly collapses, crying out for Sir Oscar, who wonders if the man is dying from his wounds. What? Looking through the documents further, he discovers a list of heinous crimes, including arson and assassination. TSK. Disgusted, Oscar turns to leave, calling the dying man a walking pile of dung. As he departs, an assassin's blade appears silently outside the window. He leaves the scene, documents in hand, advising the man to be a better person in his next life. A new day dawns over the majestic White Tower. Back in his room, he sighs with exhaustion. He sinks into a chair, frustrated that this weak body is exhausted after casting only a few basic spells. He clenches his fist, wondering if he'll ever be able to use that signature magic in this weakened state. This was the legendary magic that made Oscar Sage the greatest mage in all of human history. He attempts to summon his ultimate spell, the Wind Archive, but the spell immediately disperses, confirming he cannot yet wield his former power. He resolves to understand his new body's limits and begins a comprehensive magic scan. Realizing his memories are incomplete, he decides he must learn everything about this body's original owner, Oscar Crusian. His investigation begins with the identity of the body's owner, Oscar Crusian, heir to a count. He was also the sole survivor of a tragic fire that destroyed his family's mansion. Recognized as a child prodigy, the magic world fought fiercely to recruit the young genius. During his 6 years at the Magic Academy, he never scored anything less than perfect marks. An extraordinary thesis cemented his reputation, proving he was an undeniable genius. Reading this, he wonders how such a genius could still be a mere level 1 mage, a truly unfortunate outcome. If not for this mysterious limitation, he could have become one of the greatest mages of his generation. His research leads him to a shocking conclusion. Oscar Crusian had mana deficiency syndrome. This, he realizes, explains how a genius in magic theory could be stuck at level 1, unable to actually use his knowledge. He finishes a detailed magical scan of the body, the diagnostic orb fading in his hand. With a flash of light, he commands the system to confirm the results. A holographic window appears, and he stares in disbelief at the unexpected information. The scan reveals the truth. The body does not have mana deficiency syndrome at all. Staring wide-eyed at the screen, he realizes it's not an illness. The horrifying truth dawns on him. Someone deliberately sealed his mana circuit, A brief overview explains the nature of mana deficiency syndrome. The system illustrates how a mage's level is determined by their physical mana circuits. It clarifies that those with this syndrome have an incomplete environment, capping their potential at level 3. He stands abruptly, noting that Oscar Crusian's circumstances are different. He concludes the mana circuit wasn't naturally twisted, but was tied up on purpose. Walking to a bookshelf, he reasons that a true genius like Oscar would have known he didn't have the syndrome. Wishing for a diary to get some answers, he pulls a random book from the shelf. He remembers Franz's words, realizing that Oscar Crusian was known as an alcoholic. He theorizes that perhaps this reputation was a persona Oscar created on purpose. He deduces that Oscar knew his circuit was blocked and that someone was trying to kill him. This leads him to wonder if Oscar purposely acted as a playboy to throw his enemies off. Carrying a pile of books, he now understands why Oscar was tempted by the illegal elixir. He was alone and couldn't trust anyone. He sees Oscar's struggle as being bound by chains that he desperately needed to break. In contrast, he confidently declares that all he needs to do is untie the knot, a task he knows he can accomplish. He pauses, confused by what he finds among the documents. He discovers one of Oscar's personal books, titled The Reinterpretation of Basic Magic. Flipping through it, he's amazed to find it filled with detailed notes and complex magic circles. The notes detail ways to improve Windcutter, evolve Windshield, and even apply White Tower magic to modern guns. He realizes Oscar's concept for an advanced Windshield was far more than a simple defensive spell. The book is filled with notes on situational applications and even contains several new basic spells Oscar created himself. He reflects on the tragedy that Oscar, unable to use magic, conducted all these brilliant experiments in his mind. He finally understands why Oscar was called a genius, recognizing their shared talent for interpreting magical theory. A vision of Oscar writing passionately reveals the boy's deep and genuine love for magic. He reads the book's final dedication, a hope that its contents will aid the White Tower, written by a mage facing his greatest challenge. The realization hits him. Oscar knew everything and was fully aware of his dire situation. He pictures Oscar holding the elixir, understanding he had to face his fate completely alone. He sinks into a chair, speaking Oscar Crusian's name with newfound respect and empathy. He acknowledges Oscar as a young mage who walked a lonely path without breaking under his cruel fate. He sits down, his resolve hardening as he decides to take on Oscar's burden. "I will undo the knot you could not untie," he vows to the fallen genius. He begins to meditate, his former self appearing behind him as he prepares to break the seal. As power surges through his body, he swears to make those who brutally broke Oscar's wings pay. The scene shifts to a serene and sunlit greenhouse, filled with lush plants. He finds himself walking through the greenhouse, confused as to how he got there. He recalls falling asleep while researching the circuit, and is startled when a voice calls out, "Master!" He sees a memory of his past self, with his 3 disciples realizing where and when he is. He grimaces, wondering if this is the effect of the damned dream curse. The curse, inflicted by the demon world's Viscount of Nightmares, forces him to relive his past every time he sleeps. His past self tosses and turns, tormented by the dark magic of the curse. He concludes that the curse is bound to his soul, not his physical body, explaining why it followed him. Seeing the untainted memory of his students, he feels a sense of relief and begins the lesson. His past self smiles, holding up 4 fingers as colorful orbs of elemental magic swirl around him. A young boy named Lloyd Schultz asks if the White Tower pursues harmonization magic, which the master confirms is their specialty. Another student, a young girl named Sasha Meist, asks if each tower has a magical preference, and the master affirms this is due to magic's differing traits. He explains to his 3 young disciples that the Azure and White Towers both focus on balance-type magic. An energetic blonde boy, Gili Dominic, loudly wishes for acceleration magic, but the master gently informs him that one is born with their magic type. When Shasha asks how to know their type, the master demonstrates a simple spell and asks her to try it. Shasha hesitates, unfamiliar with the spell, but her master encourages her to take her time. After she successfully casts a gentle wisp of magic, the master declares she is a harmony type, just like him. Hee. Shasha beams with delight, happy to share a magic type with her master. Gilly and Lloyd both want their turn, and the master reveals Gilly is an acceleration type, exactly as he wished. Yes, Gilly erupts with joy as the master smiles and then calls on Lloyd for his turn. As Lloyd conjures a beautiful magical flower, Shasha exclaims how pretty it is, and the master reveals Lloyd is a special type. Lloyd asks if he can change his type, wanting to be a balanced type like his master, but is told that special types are extremely rare and cannot be altered. The master smiles slyly, pondering Lloyd's request. He teasingly offers to give Lloyd the most private lessons, and even look into changing magic types, piquing the boy's interest. Lloyd's eyes widen, a faint blush on his cheeks as he realizes he might get the most private lessons. After the master explains special types need a good teacher, Lloyd agrees, but only if he gets his promised lessons. Haha, the master agrees with a pinky promise, fondly calling Lloyd a rascal. A memory reveals that Lloyd was known as the Promise Man. He reflects that despite his maturity, Lloyd was still just a child at heart. The dream fades, and Oscar awakens on a couch to an announcement from the broadcasting room. As his name is called, Oscar sits up, wondering how long he was asleep. He exits a lift, noting he has unlocked 12 of his 20 physical circuits, leaving 8 to go. By unlocking his physical circuits, he also gained 2 mana circuits, leveling up to a level 2 mage as he knocks on room 4202. He enters the room, surprised to find himself happy about being a mere level 2, where Frank asks how he's feeling and notes his memories are returning. Oscar confirms his memories are coming back, and Frank says he is glad. He remembers that White Tower Elder Maxim Bisk was once his junior. He recalls Maxim as an honest and diligent junior who joined the tower long after him, someone he expected to have a bright future. A fond memory surfaces of a young Maxim following him around, first calling him Senior, and then Magic Tower Master. Oscar chuckles at the memory, remarking on Maxim's plentiful magic, which confuses the now middle-aged elder. Maxim reports that the heads of the Gordon family were killed, startling Oscar. When asked if he has anything to say, Oscar claims he doesn't, but is sure they were killed for a good reason. He then bluntly reveals it's because they tried to assassinate him, shocking Maxim. He presents the ledger as proof of the assassination contract, explaining the elixir was poisoned, which makes Maxim realize the truth behind his illness. Oscar confirms he was attacked when he went to talk to them, and Maxim begins reading the ledger with a grim expression. As Oscar explains the ledger details the contract killing, Maxim agrees to rule the incident as self-defense. Oscar thanks him, and then asks for a personal favor. Maxim agrees to arrange a meeting with the Magic Tower Master, saying it's easy since Oscar often discussed magic with him. Oscar is surprised to learn he apparently discussed magic with Shasha, the current master, but Maxim informs him she won't be available for 6 months. He explains she's on an important business trip, which puzzles Oscar, who finds it strange for the Tower Master to handle such minor commissions. Maxim clarifies the commission is vital, and then reveals the Master's current level is a 7, a high mage. Oscar reflects that he was level 9 at her age, and, given Shasha's talent, she should have reached at least level 8 by now. Maxim changes the subject, noting the clean cut on the reported corpse and asking if Oscar has resumed practicing attack magic. Oscar gives a non-committal answer, saying he trains when he feels like it, and Maxim dismisses him. Haha. Vice Master Hamel Glimwitz enters, cheerfully remarking that he came to tell Maxim not to be so strict but was too late. Maxim defends his need to scold Oscar for trouble, but Hamel expresses his own worry, as he was the one who brought Oscar to the tower. Hamel speculates that Oscar's perfectly executed basic magic proves he's been studying very hard in secret. Hamel suggests they head to the Elders' meeting, where Elder Fidelina is waiting for them. Pulled by the memory of his dream, Oscar visits the greenhouse where he once taught his students. He notes that the place feels emptier now, before a voice calls out to him. A gardener greets him as young Sir Oscar, but having no memory of the man, Oscar asks who he is. The gardener introduces himself as Wilter, the facilities manager, sadly confirming the rumors about Oscar's memory loss are true. WTF Oscar is mortified to learn how far the rumors of his amnesia have spread while Wilter laughs. Oscar asks why he was called young Sir Oscar, and Wilter explains he also worked for the previous master, the, quote, Sir Oscar. He is struck by the realization that people now differentiate between him and his past self. He smiles, approving of the distinction, and asks Wilter to continue being his conversation buddy. When Oscar asks where he is going, Wilter replies that he has worked at the tower for 40 years and asks if there is a problem. Wilter explains that he has served 3 masters and is now the only one left in his entire department. He begins to recall the reason he held out for so long. Memory flashes of his past self, Oscar Sage, inspiring tower members to live with pride. Ahem. Wilter admits that from that day forward, he worked, believing he was a true member of the White Tower, making Oscar blush. Oscar insists the sentiment isn't amusing, but Wilter thanks him and promptly announces he is quitting. Wilter explains that the tower's dire financial state is glaringly obvious from the dilapidated facilities. Oscar astutely asks if he is quitting because of his upcoming long service award. An explanation reveals that a 40-year service reward is enough money to buy a house in a large city. Wilter explains the tower cannot afford his reward and that others would have to risk their lives on commissions just to pay him. He solemnly refuses to accept money from the place he considers his second home, a burden he cannot bear. Oscar is shocked, realizing the tower's situation is even worse than he knew. While other magic towers are enjoying historic profits, the White Tower is falling behind. He clenches his fist until it bleeds, frustrated that he only has titles while his rivals have wealth. Wilter cries out his name in alarm. Noticing the blood, Wilter worriedly asks why he's clenching his fist so hard. Oscar asks when he plans to leave, learning that Wilter will depart in 2 weeks. Using magic to clean the blood from his hand, he again asks Wilter to remain his conversation partner. He tells the shocked gardener that he doesn't need to leave. A fire of determination burns in Oscar's eyes. He clenches the magic-infused cloth, resolving to find a way to earn a lot of money. But later at his desk, the reality of his boast hits him, and he wonders how he can possibly do it. He considers his limited options as a level 2 mage: research, lectures, commissions, but knows they won't pay quickly enough. He needs a business that will rake in big money fast and realizes potions are his only viable option. Wait. As he scans a newspaper, an idea suddenly strikes him. The scene shifts to an elders meeting, where a woman is furious about embezzlement, but a blonde man seems dismissive. The elder in charge of finances, Fidelina, demands to know what he means, but Hamel simply says the culprit is reflecting. She rages that stealing is a habit that only gets worse, but Hamel sighs, telling her not to worry. Hamel's quip that there isn't much to steal anyway only infuriates Fidelina further. She demands they throw the culprit into isolation training, but Hamel refuses, questioning the point for a level 1 mage as Maxim observes their childish spat. Hamel takes a sip of his drink, agreeing with Maxim's sentiment that isolation would be too harsh. He declares it would be nothing more than torture, but Fidelina objects. Instead, Hamel proposes the child simply pay back 3 times the research fees, a lenient punishment that baffles Fidelina. Sigh. Fidelina laments their lack of money, stating they need to make a decision soon. She suggests a drastic measure: sell the potion production equipment to survive for 3 months, or else they must shut down. Vice Tower Master Hamel firmly interjects, declaring that he cannot permit that. He reminds them that the Magic Tower is a sacred place where mages gather to study and share knowledge. He refuses to sell their future just to satiate their immediate hunger. Fidelina bitterly asks if they even have a future. Maxim shouts her name, reminding her they've already waited 20 years. She urges the Vice Tower Master to face reality. Even if a genius appeared to save them, they would never come to a failing tower. As someone knocks, Fidelina angrily asks who is interrupting, but Hamel calmly invites them in. Oscar appears at the doorway and introduces himself to the elders. Standing before the council, Oscar announces that he has a suggestion for them. Oscar calmly asks the elders to let him start a business, shocking them with his request. Wow. Fidelina furiously points at him, questioning how he dares to ask for a business after just embezzling research funds. Oscar explains his idea came from an article about a terrible flu outbreak that has put the Vince estate under lockdown. Maxim confirms he read the news, noting that people fear it might be the deadly Cadena flu. The narration reveals there is no current cure for the Cadena flu, as the White Tower's vaccine recipe was lost 2 decades ago. Oscar explains that since not even the dominant Azure Tower can replicate the vaccine, he wants to be the one to do it. As the elders reel in shock, Oscar boldly declares his intention to revive the White Tower's old monopoly. Fidelina scoffs, dismissing his proposal as not even worth her time. A flashback explains that despite massive investment, no one has managed to recreate the vaccine for 20 years. Fidelina glares skeptically, doubting a 20-year-old kid could succeed where everyone else has failed. Oscar calmly acknowledges both the past failures and his own youth, but adds a confident, however. With a sparkle, he makes a simple, bold declaration: I'm a genius. He smiles with unshakable confidence in his own abilities. Fidelina is left utterly speechless and infuriated by his audacity. She erupts, listing his embezzled funds, over 700,000 bells for research and 25,000 for illegal medicine, while Oscar looks on unfazed. As she accuses him of being a spoiled rich kid, Maxim sternly interrupts her, calling her by name. Maxim calmly reminds Fidelina that Oscar is there to make an official investment proposal, and that she, as treasurer, is being too rude. Ugh. Chastised, Fidelina reluctantly apologizes. Oscar realizes her hostility is due to her role as treasurer, which makes sense given his uselessness for the past 2 years. Turning back to her, he confidently asks her to consider his plan. He piques their interest by asking if the flu being the Cadena strain is a coincidence, and directs them to the newspaper. He points out that Archbishop Baldwin of the El Terra Order has suspiciously changed his pilgrimage plans to stay in Siren for a month. An explanation reveals the El Terra Order has 7 archbishops who are supposed to be paragons of virtue. But in reality, they are far from it, needing vast funds to campaign for the position of cardinal. Pilgrimages are often used to visit nobles and merchants to collect these necessary funds. Oscar questions the archbishop's choice to visit Siren, a city that has been in decline for years. Hamel agrees it's strange, but thought the reason was simply for prayers. Oscar counters, questioning the logic of holding prayers for a barren land. He spins a globe, explaining the preset pilgrimage route includes Siren, Mosque, Melbourne, and Greenwale, before his finger lands on the final destination, Vince. Oscar lays out his theory. The archbishop is deliberately spending a month in each city before Siren. He concludes the archbishop is trying to avoid visiting Vince, a revelation that shocks the elders. Oscar explains that any unfortunate incident during a pilgrimage is seen as a sign of the goddess's anger. Such an event would be a political death sentence for an archbishop aspiring to become a cardinal. Hamel connects the dots, realizing the archbishop is stalling to avoid the Cadena flu, which Oscar confirms is his interpretation. Fidelina grudgingly admits his analysis is good for a theorist, but dismisses it as pure speculation. Maxim states that he understands the argument, giving Oscar a brief moment of hope. However, he apologetically informs a stunned Oscar that the tower cannot officially sponsor him. Maxim explains they can't afford his project without sacrificing the funding for all other mages. However, Maxim offers a solution. He will invest his own personal money into Oscar's business. Fidelina cries out in protest, calling Maxim Vice Tower Master, but he waves off her concern, saying it's fine. He offers 30,000 bells, asking if it's enough, an amount Oscar quietly contemplates. His expression darkens as he internally realizes it's not enough. In a silent scream of frustration, he knows it's nowhere near enough. In the potion production chamber, Oscar despairs over the meager funding. Deciding to proceed with Plan B, he inspects the lab equipment and finds it satisfactory. He declares he'll use the money to create a vaccine sample and get the rest of the funds from the archbishop, the one most desperate for a cure. He puts on his goggles with a sly grin, musing that it's always best to extort the desperate. Striking a determined pose, he prepares to work, leaving his blue-haired assistant to wonder what's gotten into him. His eyes narrow in intense concentration as a red wisp of magic rises from a vial. The red potion simmers as Oscar carefully begins the brewing process in his lab. Deciding it's the perfect moment, he precisely adds another reagent to the bubbling mixture. He lifts his goggles with a satisfied smile, judging his initial work to be a success. Admiring his practice energy potion, Oscar reflects that a true master never loses their touch, just as his panting assistant Frank arrives. Whoosh! Frank stumbles in, groaning that the heavy sacks of ingredients he's carrying are about to break his back. Collapsing with exhaustion, Frank presents a long receipt and begs for a drink, prompting Oscar to offer a fatigue recovery potion. Frank gratefully accepts the potion from Oscar in exchange for the receipt. Wah! He's delighted by the warm, freshly brewed potion, and Oscar smugly confirms he made it just moments ago. Oscar praises the excellent condition of the ingredients, and Frank proudly explains that he haggled to get the very best. Impressed, Oscar jokes that Frank's sharp eye is better suited for a merchant, but Frank begins to make an ill-timed joke about the tower going broke. Bonk Oscar gives his assistant a swift chop to the head for his pessimistic comment. Ugh. Rubbing his head, Frank asks what the chop was for, and Oscar apologizes, explaining it was for insulting the tower. Frank recovers and asks for instructions, revealing that Elder Fidelina ordered him to assist Oscar with his work. Amused by Fidelina's stern but helpful nature, Oscar tells Frank they can start by moving the ingredients. He effortlessly lifts 2 heavy sacks, internally musing that he didn't really need an assistant after all. An unseen narrator reflects that the White Tower's most talented individuals always have a few screws loose. The thought continues, noting that if these talented children could just get their act together, they'd be a great asset. Identifying his assistant as Franz Zirius, one of these promising individuals, Oscar decides to test his potential. As they unpack, Frank examines the herbs and nervously asks Oscar if they're all poisonous. The dangerous ingredients are shown in detail: red camellias and ghost mushrooms. The list of toxic components concludes with the ominous Merva leaves. Oscar explains that poisons can be medicine and quizzes Frank, who correctly states the standard 12-hour boiling method for detoxification. However, Oscar points out the method's critical flaw: boiling also destroys all the valuable nutrients. Oscar changes the subject, asking Frank if he knows about dumplings from the Yan dynasty. He then points to steaming dumplings, explaining that they are cooked using a special tool called a steamer. Oscar reveals his brilliant plan. Using that same steamer to detoxify the herbs will preserve most of their nutrients. Frank is stunned, realizing this method could extract 98% of the ingredients' effects and let them monopolize the market, just as the White Tower once did. Wow, Frank marvels, asking if the process is over, but Oscar clarifies this was only to soften the herbs for the real detoxification. Placing his hand over the steamer, Oscar announces that the true detoxification process is beginning now. He begins to cast a spell as a magic circle for air drain materializes above the steamer. Purple mana swirls intensely around Oscar as he focuses his will on the spell. He magically pulls a cloud of purple toxins from the steam, explaining to a shocked Frank that they are separating the poison. The separated toxins and beneficial essences swirl together in a magical vortex. With the toxins removed, Oscar expertly separates the remaining essences into orbs of energy and begins combining them in precise ratios. At last, he holds up a glowing vial containing the completed remedy for the Cadena flu. "Easy, right?" Oscar asks casually, then tells a stunned Frank to try making one himself. Frank panics internally, knowing the task is impossible for him since he can't even dual cast magic yet. Despite his fear, he steps forward, hesitantly asking if he should start with the air drain spell. Oscar watches closely, noting that while Frank's mana control is unstable, he's performing better than expected. But the magic quickly fizzles out, leaving Frank confused as Oscar silently concludes that's as far as he can go. Frank turns to Oscar, frustrated, and admits he can't dual cast, asking if he's being teased. He protests that dual casting is a level 4 or 5 skill, while he's only a level 3, but Oscar calmly offers, "Let me teach you." Shocked to be learning the secret technique, Frank listens as Oscar explains the simple principle: setting up partitions in one's mind. He visualizes the concept, instructing Frank to use the left side of his mind for one spell and the right side for another. "Try it," Oscar encourages, as Frank stares at his hands and contemplates the seemingly simple idea. Focusing his will, Frank successfully manifests a stable orb of green magic within his initial purple spell. He stares in disbelief as Oscar congratulates him on learning to dual cast, wondering aloud how it could have been so easy. Frank questions why such a simple technique was kept secret for so long, and Oscar grimly explains it was because of greed. He elaborates that senior mages hoarded their hard-won knowledge, a selfish tradition that Frank now bypasses as he successfully practices the technique. A flashback to a war room illustrates Oscar's point. Such selfish traditions were a hindrance on the battlefield, where survival demanded sharing knowledge. Oh, Frank marvels at the finished potion in his hand, a look of pure delight on his face. Oscar praises Franz's talent, admitting he didn't expect him to succeed on his first try. Frank blushes, giving Oscar credit for the clear explanation, but Oscar teases him about being angry earlier, making him cough awkwardly. Now energized, Frank happily declares he's ready to process the rest of the ingredients while Oscar watches with a knowing smile. A few hours later, the tables are covered in finished potions, and Frank is utterly exhausted on the floor, groaning that he's going to die. Looking down at his collapsed assistant, Oscar calmly tallies the impressive final count: 514 bottles. Suddenly, Hamill bursts into the room with a look of panic, shouting, "Oscar, We have a problem. He presents a letter revealing that the rival Azure Towers company, New Tech, is in Siren to meet with Archbishop Baldwin. Oscar reads the grim news, realizing their rivals weren't just stalling but had a plan, and they might be too late. Frank panics, realizing that if the Azure Tower secures the contract first, their own remedy will be completely useless. While Hamel tries to console a distraught Frank, Oscar calmly interjects, declaring that the fight isn't over yet. Oscar recalls that the Kadena flu is classified as a B-rank disaster, a fact that seems to give him an idea. He announces there is one thing they can try, giving a stunned Hamel a glimmer of hope, which Oscar confirms with a simple yes. The scene shifts to an opulent building, identified as a lodging in the city of Siren. Knock knock. An aide announces to the Archbishop that the guests he was expecting have arrived. Archbishop Baldwin, a senior member of the Altera Order, calmly instructs his aide to let them in. Two men enter, Moira Main, a level 5 mage from the Azure Tower, and Neil Brion, the managing director of New Tech, who thank the Archbishop for his care. Archbishop Baldwin offers Moira a seat, which he gratefully accepts. Getting straight to business, the Archbishop asks about the progress on the Kadena flu remedy, and Moira confidently assures him it's going very well. Ha ha ha! The Archbishop laughs in relief and asks when it will be finished, to which Moira replies that they just need to complete clinical trials. Moira explains they will need imperial permission after the trials are done, but adds a hesitant, however. He nervously admits that clinical trials take time, prompting the Archbishop to demand a specific date for the medicine's launch. Moira's promise to finish within half a year enrages the Archbishop. The Archbishop explodes, shouting that he must leave for Vince in 4 months, but Moira insists their schedule is fixed. As the Archbishop fumes, his aide announces another mage has arrived, and he impatiently barks for them to be let in. TSK. The Archbishop glares at his guests, demanding to know why they didn't mention another person, but Moira insists they came alone. An ominous portrait of Neil Brion is shown as the scene marks a brief pause. As the door creaks open, the Archbishop wonders who the unexpected visitor could possibly be. A new figure appears in the doorway, politely introducing himself as Oscar Crusian, a level 2 mage from the White Tower. Oscar offers a slight, confident smile, his eyes glinting with purpose. The Archbishop and the 2 men from the Azure Tower look on in surprise, questioning what business the White Tower has there. Oscar gives a formal, respectful bow before the seated men. He announces he is there to discuss the sale of the Kadena flu cure. His bold declaration sends a shockwave through the room, stunning everyone present. Oscar smirks at the perfect timing, casually asking if he has arrived too late. Seizing the opportunity, the Archbishop assures him he's not, as the others aren't ready. Oscar smoothly replies that the White Tower can negotiate immediately. That's a lie, Moira shouts, pointing accusingly at Oscar and claiming the White Tower lacks the resources to develop a cure. After correcting Moira's pronunciation of his name, Oscar faces the Archbishop, who asks him directly if he truly has the cure. Placing a wooden box on the table, Oscar confidently asks who would dare lie to an Archbishop of the Altera Order. He opens the box to reveal a sample of the cure, causing the Archbishop to gasp in surprise. The Archbishop immediately begins to negotiate production details with Oscar, prompting an outraged protest from a sidelined Moira. Snapping at Moira for coming unprepared, the Archbishop dismisses his protests, but Moira stammers that they don't have government approval. A look of sudden realization crosses Moira's face. Right! He triumphantly asks Oscar if he has approval from the Empire's FDA, to which Oscar calmly replies, no. Moira gloats that the White Tower is in the same position, and boasts that his company can mass-produce the cure once they get approval. Moira leverages the Azure Tower's history, assuring the Archbishop their treatment will be superior, while Oscar remains silent. Oscar finds it amusing that Moira would dare boast about the Azure Tower's long history in front of a mage from the White Tower. What? The single word hangs in the air as Moira is taken aback by Oscar's comment. An angry aura flares around Moira as he glares at Oscar, demanding he take back his words right now. Oscar coolly asks if he said something wrong before posing a simple history question: which magic tower was established first? Moira scoffs, calling him petty for arguing over a mere 5-year difference. A narration describes the insurmountable gap that all Azure Tower masters have desperately wished to close. Oscar stares ahead with a look of cold determination. He thinks to himself that this gap will never close, not even in 10,000 years. A purple-haired man argues with Archbishop Baldwin, reminding him of the White Tower's potion monopoly just 20 years ago. Ha! The man dismisses it as ancient history that no one remembers, only to be cut short by a sudden realization. From the shadows, Oscar's voice menacingly questions, if it's truly a past, no one remembers. As a dark, glitching aura surrounds him, Oscar coldly notes their dismissive attitude. The purple-haired man and a white-haired official realize with a shock that the aura they feel is far too powerful for a mere level 2 mage. As the purple-haired man watches in disbelief, Oscar declares that he will have to remind them. An attendant bursts in, announcing an urgent call for the Archbishop. As the men look on, the attendant leans in to reveal the caller's identity. The call is from the Lord of Vince. On the line, the Lord of Vince thanks LCIA for his immeasurable kindness, leaving the Archbishop confused. The Archbishop is utterly baffled by the sudden praise. The Lord of Vince joyfully reports that the vaccine cured all patients within hours, calling it a miracle from the goddess as Oscar smirks, his plan succeeding. The Archbishop asks about side effects, and the Lord reports there are none, eagerly asking when the second batch will be ready. Stunning the Azure Tower mages. The scene shifts to the Lord of Vince walking through town as he assures the Archbishop he doesn't mean to rush them. A flustered Archbishop promises the second batch will be sent soon, earning profuse thanks from the Lord. Click. After hanging up, the Archbishop turns to Oscar and asks if this was his doing, and Oscar calmly confirms the delivery was successful. The purple-haired man slams the table, accusing Oscar of breaking FDA laws, but the Archbishop calmly refutes him. Oscar condescendingly suggests the man knows little about laws and pivots to asking about wartime regulations, infuriating his opponent. Musing that 20 years of peace have made them forget, Oscar recalls the events of 22 years ago. He reveals that during the war against the demons, the deadliest weapon wasn't a sword, but a pandemic. Clerks are shown frantically stamping documents. A flashback shows a new law being added, designating treatments for the wounded in war as, quote, special treatments. Oscar explains that these treatments are exempt from FDA laws, but the purple-haired man argues they aren't at war, prompting Oscar to list the 3 conditions that define one. The first condition is a war against another species or nation. The second condition is a revolution. The third is a disaster of B-class or above, and Oscar reveals the Cadena flu is a B-class disaster, shocking the man. Oscar concludes his legal lesson, stating this is precisely why they don't need to follow the FDA's laws. The white-haired official quickly tries to appease the Archbishop by offering to send their own treatment, but Oscar tells him he misunderstands the situation. When the Archbishop asks for clarification, Oscar explains that the race was over the moment the White Tower's cure arrived. Oscar corners the Archbishop, noting the Lord of Vince now credits the White Tower, and it would be impossible to claim the Azure Tower was responsible now. The purple-haired man desperately offers to lower their price, but the Archbishop furiously cuts him off. The Archbishop slams the table indignantly, asking if they are trying to buy his reputation with money, as the man stammers an apology. Enough! The Archbishop, fuming, orders the 2 Azure Tower representatives to leave immediately. The purple-haired man stands up, utterly defeated. Leaving, he glares at Oscar and vows revenge, prompting Oscar to wonder if all villains read from the same script. Oscar smirks, revealing he already registered the patent for the treatment and vaccine with the palace. He coolly informs the stunned man that if the Azure Tower wants to sell a cure, they will have to pay royalties to the White Tower. The purple-haired man seethes, his face contorted in pure rage. He storms out of the room in a fury. The white-haired official bows respectfully to the Archbishop before leaving. The official stops, standing silently before Oscar. As the man passes, a trail of mint-like energy floats from him, catching Oscar's attention. Oscar looks on with a sharp, surprised expression as he senses something from the man. He notes the man carried a unique scent. A brief vision shows the man looking battered and bloodied. The narration identifies the smell as a refreshing and clear mint scent. Oscar looks troubled, realizing this scent is a familiar clue, but he can't quite place it. Oscar laughs heartily as his opponent from the Azure Tower stands speechless before the closed doors. Archbishop Baldwin gestures for Oscar to take a seat, glad they can finally talk, and Oscar graciously accepts. The Archbishop cuts to the chase, asking for Oscar's price and revealing the Azure Tower had requested 2 million bells. With a confident smile, Oscar holds up his hand and declares he'll take 5 million. The Archbishop bursts into a strained laugh, completely stunned by Oscar's bold counteroffer. A few hours later, back at the White Tower, a voice cries out in utter disbelief, "What is this?" A hand holds a check for a staggering 10 million, the owner struggling to count the zeros in shock. Oscar gives a self-satisfied smile, coolly confirming the unbelievable sum, 10 million bells. Ack, Fidelina and Hamel joyfully squish Oscar's face, exclaiming they knew he could do it and had believed in him all along. Maxim inspects the payment, remarking with surprise that not even the Archbishop would typically give so much. Oscar, flanked by his delighted colleagues, explains to a curious Maxim that there were some additional fees involved. A sly glint shines in Oscar's eyes, revealing his satisfaction with the successful negotiation. Oscar proudly presents the 10 million bell check to Maxim. Oscar explains his brilliant PR move. The White Tower will officially announce that Archbishop Baldwin foresaw the flu via a divine revelation, allowing them to prepare antidotes. As the Archbishop daydreams about his enhanced reputation, Oscar explains how this story will make the Archbishop title even more appealing in his pursuit of becoming a cardinal. Oscar reveals the Archbishop was so pleased with the narrative that he paid 1 million bells more than the contract price. In exchange, Oscar adds, they promised to deliver the vaccines and antidotes within a single week. Maxim is deeply impressed, noting that, while the disciplinary action demanded 3 times the embezzled sum, Oscar brought back 400 times that amount. Declaring the disciplinary actions over, Maxim asks for objections, and Fidelina gives a cheerful thumbs up, agreeing completely. Maxim offers his full support, acknowledging the tight deadline, as Oscar determines they must gather as many level 4 or higher mages as possible. An eager Fidelina asks what she should say to recruit the mages. Maxim smiles slyly, instructing her to announce that the potion lab is hiring level 4 mages who will be well paid. The mages buzz with excitement over rumors of getting paid and even being served pork instead of chicken, making the offer wildly popular. Oscar claps his hands together, calling for the attention of the assembled senior mages. The chattering crowd of mages falls silent, turning their attention to Oscar. With a snap of his fingers, Oscar prepares to get their undivided attention. He casts a sound-binding spell, forcing the mages to cover their ears as they cry out in pain from the piercing sound. Now that he has the room's attention, Oscar explains that they are gathered to make vaccines and antidotes for the flu, and formally asks for their help. The mages whisper doubtfully, questioning why the genius is bowing to them and wondering if this is another one of his scams. Oscar asks Frank why the mages seem to dislike him, and Frank bluntly replies, "Duh," telling him to consider his past actions. A blonde woman, Lena White, steps forward, challenging Oscar by asking how they can make medicine when the White Tower's production methods are lost. Oscar confidently declares he's recovered the methods, sparking disbelief among the mages who question if the antidote has even been proven effective. He confirms the contract is signed and the antidote's value is immense, leading the mages to realize leaking the production method would be a disaster. The skeptical mages ask why he would share such precious and secret information with them. Holding a paper, Oscar calmly states that he doesn't understand why any of them are still at the White Tower. Lena glares at him, angrily questioning his condescending attitude when he's the one asking for a favor. She retorts that no one in the room deserves to hear such words from him. Oscar meets her gaze, telling her he knows exactly what all of them have sacrificed for the White Tower. Lena is stunned into silence by his unexpected words, as a knowing smile plays on Oscar's lips. He begins reciting her record, identifying her as Lena White, a level 5 mage who rejected offers from 7 corporations, including the powerful Red Tower. Oscar continues, pointing out Descartes Rain, a level 5 mage who refused a position as a royal mage, and another who declined an Imperial Academy instructor role 4 times, shocking them with his knowledge. He then addresses Sophia Rose, a level 4 mage, noting she turned down the Golden Tower despite her creative alchemy skills. Oh my. Turning back to the group, Oscar admits that if he had received such offers, he doesn't know if he could have refused them. He praises their loyalty for never abandoning the tower, prompting a shocked Lena to ask if the elders knew about their recruitment offers. Oscar confirms the elders knew but feigned ignorance to avoid burdening them, a revelation that visibly moves the crowd. He solemnly states that the White Tower is currently facing its coldest and most difficult winter. He continues, emphasizing that even though they all had opportunities to leave for warmer, better places, they all chose to stay. Looking down with resolve, he asks a rhetorical question about trust. He declares that if he cannot trust people like them who have proven their loyalty, then who in the world could he possibly trust? Switching tactics, Oscar fakes crocodile tears, lamenting that if they refuse, he and Frank will have to struggle alone as low-level mages. As Oscar theatrically laments, Frank tells him to hurry up, asking if he's the low-level mage Oscar was talking about. Oscar puts on a pair of green goggles, unfazed by Lena White's skeptical stare. Ahem. A moved Lena coughs to hide her embarrassment as she turns away. The mages buzz with excitement, asking about the goggles and wondering what to do first, while someone urges them to stop watching and get started. Frank marvels that Oscar actually convinced everyone with his words, thinking that if this is a dream, it's not a bad one. Oscar regretfully informs them the meal isn't pork, causing the mages to panic, wondering if it's chicken or even rat meat. Woohoo! The entire group, led by Oscar, celebrates their successful potion-making effort amid a shower of confetti. 1 week later, Oscar walks across a lawn and notices a trail of pink petals on the ground. Sitting down, he muses that he must be back after being dragged in by the Vice Tower Master and decides he should say hello. He settles in to read a newspaper, calmly waiting. The newspaper reports on the end of the pandemic, Oscar's Peace Award nomination, and the White Tower's revival, all while crediting Archbishop Baldwin's divine foresight. Frank runs over shouting Oscar's name as Oscar calmly reads, satisfied that everything is going according to plan. Frank excitedly presents a clipboard, exclaiming that the vaccine orders are pouring in. He gushes that everyone from the Northern Territories to the Imperial family is placing orders, making their initial payment seem small, as Oscar notes that the urgent crisis has been averted for now. Frank suddenly has a worrying thought, asking if he's an idiot for realizing that once the outbreak is over, vaccine sales will plummet for decades. Oscar assures him not to worry, revealing he has another high-demand potion prepared, leaving Frank stunned by his foresight. Frank excitedly asks if it's the legendary Star Tears, but Oscar says it's not time for that yet. They'll start with lower-ranked potions. A description explains that Star Tears is the White Tower's most famous and miraculous recovery potion, rumored to bring the dead back to life. The text declares that its release will create incredible echoes throughout the world. Oscar thinks to himself that making it now would invite thieves, so he must first increase the White Tower's power using the Archbishop as a shield. Oscar cheerfully orders Frank to gather the materials for it, causing Frank to groan, instantly regretting his question. Frank complains that Lantis leaves and Pisun stems will be hard to find, but Oscar points out they are local specialties, prompting Frank to question how long ago that was true. Gosh. Frank explains that the herb fields that grew those ingredients went under long ago, leaving Oscar completely shocked. An angry voice shouts that Oscar is crazy for coming all this way, because he didn't believe someone. A determined Oscar walks ahead in a hood, while Frank follows, huffing and puffing from the effort. Arriving at their carriage, Frank questions the need to walk somewhere so remote, but Oscar states the carriage can't go any deeper. As they approach an entrance, Oscar mentions they're 10 miles away, which confuses Frank, who notes that the unit miles disappeared 18 years ago. Oscar is shocked that miles are no longer used, and Frank explains that measurements were unified to meters and grams after the war. Holy shit, Oscar is stunned. They also got rid of pounds, which Frank confirms was done because they were hard to calculate with. Frank nostalgically admits he enjoyed the old calculations, then spots a small hut in the distance. Oscar and Frank approach the remote hut, and Oscar calls out to see if anyone is inside. An old man with a single glowing red eye cracks the door open, asking if they walked all the way there. Frank confirms they had to walk from the entrance, then spots a convoy of cars approaching in the distance. A line of old-fashioned cars speeds down the dirt path toward the hut. A car's wheel crushes a patch of white flowers as it drives onto the property. Hey, owner. A businessman in a white suit and sunglasses leans out of his car, asking the owner if he's ready to sell his land today. The old man, herbalist Ivan, steps out of his hut, looking very displeased. The businessman offers 10 times the land's value, telling Ivan to stop being so stubborn. Ivan flatly refuses the offer, even for a castle, while Frank asks a clueless Oscar what is happening. TSK, the businessman Devor Pawal taunts Ivan, saying playing hard to get is only cute for so long and asking who will remember him when he dies. Herbalist Ivan sternly replies that it is none of Devor's business. Devor gestures dismissively, urging Ivan to sell his land and live the rest of his life in comfort. He warns Ivan that once factories are built nearby, his land's value will plummet. Ivan scoffs, retorting that as long as he is there, no factories will ever get permission to be built. Devor Powell is left momentarily speechless by Ivan's defiance. Annoyed, Devor tells his men that they're leaving. An underling opens the car door for Devor. Before leaving, Devor contemptuously flicks a wad of cash onto the ground as payment for their trouble. The stack of money lands in the dirt at Ivan's feet. Who? As the men leave, Frank, Oscar, and herbalist Ivan watch the convoy disappear. Driving away, Devor Powell's men recognize the White Tower robes, wondering what the beggar bastards are doing there and guessing it must be for herbs. Devor asks how much money the White Tower made from the vaccine, and his subordinate hands him a newspaper, saying it was a lot. He reads the article with a grim expression. Furious, Devor smacks his subordinate with the newspaper, demanding to know why he's only hearing about this now. Devor worries that with the White Tower's support, Ivan will never sell, and he can't afford to keep paying interest on his loans. He calls out to his men in the back seat. Devor orders his men to commission the mercenaries they contacted for a job tonight, causing one to nervously ask what kind of job. He tells his subordinate that the nature of the commission should be obvious. When his man hesitates, citing Ivan's status, Devor furiously declares they'll just kill him, have him marked as missing, and buy the land at auction. CSK, Devor admits it will be suspicious, but claims to have backing, ordering his men to kill the White Tower mages too if they interfere. His men express concern that involving the magic towers will be difficult, and that Ivan is a problem, but Devor seems to have a plan. Devor sneers, dismissing the 4 main magic towers as an outdated concept. That night, Frank lies in the grass, remarking that he thinks the herbalist is a good person for letting them stay and feeding them. Oscar smiles and agrees. In a flashback, Ivan offers them a place to sleep, explaining it's dangerous to travel at night, and that he must maintain his loyalty to the White Tower. Oscar and Frank wonder about Ivan's loyalty, and who the man in the car was. Ivan clenches his fist, revealing the man wants to build the continent's largest factory complex on his land, shocking Frank. When Oscar asks how he's held out, Ivan states that Devor can't touch him because he is the one at a disadvantage. He proudly declares himself the human cultural asset of herb cultivation. Wah! Frank realizes Ivan is protected by the imperial family, which is why he's been able to hold out for so long. Oscar tells Frank he's asking something obvious, leaving Frank confused. Ivan smiles serenely. He states that this place has been his home since birth and will remain his home until his final moments. Back in the present, Frank fondly recalls how the embarrassed Ivan rushed inside. Oscar remarks that the stars are bright and he's jealous, prompting Frank to ask what he's jealous of. Frank wonders what it's like to live such a brightly shining life, adding that a genius like Oscar probably couldn't relate. Oscar tells Frank he's outstanding too, but Frank dismisses it as empty praise. Oscar insists they aren't empty words, stating he isn't the type to give praise lightly. I am flustered. Frank changes the subject back to the pretty stars, thinking that he doesn't see why young Oscar was called a problem child. The group admires the stars from a balcony, with Oscar narrating that the inconvenience of having no streetlights was actually quite romantic. Frank questions how long ago that was and asks if they can truly revive the siren herb industry. Oscar replies that it's not impossible, but they'll need to talk details with Elder Ivan tomorrow. Suddenly, Oscar's eyes widen as he senses a dark presence. He quickly pulls Frank down, as Frank asks if he saw a ghost, but Oscar clarifies that it's not a ghost, but a person. Oscar states there are 4 intruders, but Frank is confused because he can't feel anything. Realizing their stealth surpasses even Frank's mana sense, Oscar concludes they aren't here for a friendly visit and tells Frank to get up. Elsewhere, a group of mercenaries discusses the mission, noting Ivan had previously refused their offer to kill him for Devor Powell. An older mercenary states they do the job if they are paid, but a green-haired man chides him for being passive, reminding him of their bounty. Their red-haired leader cuts them off, telling them to stay sharp as they approach the hut. The leader of the Gunman Jack gang warns that there might be a mage inside. Hearing it's a mage from the White Tower, his men are relieved it's not from one of the other, stronger towers. The green-haired man eagerly volunteers to go in first. He quietly picks the door's lock, wondering if the old man is already asleep. Dagger drawn, the assassin sneaks into the bedroom, thinking the job is boringly easy. He spins around, realizing the bed is a trap just as he dodges an attack from under the sheets. As Oscar reveals himself, a narrator calls the assassin uselessly quick-witted as a spell forms in Oscar's hand. He unleashes a wind bullet spell. A blast of wind and light shoots across the room, striking the assassin directly in the head. As the assassin collapses, Oscar emerges from the bed, remarking that the wind bullet spell is quite useful. A narration explains that young Oscar created this spell, which reinterprets basic wind magic using the principles of a gun. Standing in the doorway, Oscar remarks that the spell's killing power was greater than he expected and that 3 enemies remain. Outside, the red-haired leader and older mercenary are stunned, with the leader demanding to know what happened to Max. Oscar smirks, cheekily telling them Max is sleeping inside and will be for a while. The red-haired leader sinisterly asks if he means eternally. TSK. The older mercenary calls Max pathetic for letting his guard down, while the leader demands the herbalist's location to avoid hard feelings over Max's death. Oscar notes their professionalism in avoiding provocation and invites them to have bad feelings if they want to see blood. A powerful attack carves through the ground toward the mercenaries. The older mercenary slams his weapon down, unleashing a powerful red energy counterattack. Oscar casually stops the incoming blast with a simple snap of his fingers. A field of blue magic effortlessly deflects the attack, leaving the older mercenary in disbelief. The older mercenary laughs maniacally, clearly impressed by Oscar's power. He shouts, "Impressive!" Oscar gives a confident, knowing smirk in return. The older mercenary swings his bladed staff, but Oscar blocks the strike with a magically reinforced arm. The mercenary taunts Oscar, asking if he didn't realize it was a unique weapon. He reveals a hidden blade at the staff's base, declaring it's unfortunate for Oscar. As the blade lunges, Oscar declares that it's over now, preparing a counterspell. Oscar scoffs that the fight is more boring than he thought, flicking 2 magic discs from his fingers. As he clenches his fist, the magic discs glow, and he finishes his thought. The older mercenary is shocked as the magical discs easily deflect his weapon. "No way," he cries out in disbelief. He's amazed that Oscar remains unflustered even when caught off guard by the surprise attack. Instead, he marvels that Oscar countered in such a sophisticated manner. Oscar holds a glowing orb of magic, dismissively stating a unique weapon like that is hardly new. The older mercenary is left speechless and shocked by Oscar's words. The mercenary scoffs at Oscar for falling back after winning. The red-haired leader aims his gun, asking who Oscar is teasing. A close-up shows the gun firing, with a bright muzzle flash. The bullet grazes Oscar's cheek as he reels back, caught by surprise. A thin, bloody cut appears on Oscar's face from the shot. The red-haired leader stands over the body of the older mercenary, whom he just shot in the back of the head, calling it a shame. With his smoking gun held high, the red-haired leader stands triumphant. Oscar asks if the dead man wasn't his colleague, but the leader coldly replies he was just a replaceable subordinate. Wiping the blood from his face, Oscar sighs that criminals are terrible and asks what kind of toy the leader is holding. Click. The leader reloads his gun, saying it would be sad to be called a toy and that it's extremely expensive. He reveals the gun is imbued with 3 spells: acceleration, enhancement, and penetration, and asks if Oscar understands now. Oscar touches the cut on his cheek, admitting he was hit because he couldn't block it. The leader concedes that Oscar is arrogant, but has the talent to back it up. When asked if he wants a bullet in his head, Oscar simply replies, "Nope." Oscar adds that he thinks it would make the back of his head itchy, prompting the leader to laugh and agree. The leader concludes that conversation is over. Oscar collapses behind a fence, lamenting his current state of hiding from a gun baptism as a former tower master. Peeking out, he assesses that his wind bullets are too slow, and with only half his mana left, he can't keep escaping. He calculates that his only opening is the 1.4-second window when the gunman reloads after firing 2 shots. The red-haired leader stalks the fields, tauntingly searching for the rat. Hiding. Oscar prepares his move, knowing the leader has 1 bullet left, and he has a 1.24-second window to act. A magic circle appears as he casts Accelerate. Crackling with energy, Oscar prepares to launch his counterattack. The red-haired leader whips around, sensing the sudden surge of movement behind him. The red-haired leader spots Oscar flying through the air, questioning his location. He laughs, aiming his gun and remarking on Oscar's impressive speed. He tracks Oscar's movement, confidently stating that speed alone won't save him. As he takes aim through his sights, he declares that a mere human can't defeat his weapon's trinity of spells. The leader smirks, fully expecting his shot to be the final one. A massive, fiery blast erupts from the barrel of the gun. The magical bullet streaks through the night sky toward its target. The projectile hurtles directly towards Oscar's back. Convinced he's won, the red-haired leader grins and declares that it's over. The bullet impacts a swirling magical barrier on Oscar's back, failing to break through. Oscar calmly touches the point of impact on his shield, a small orb of magic forming at his fingertip. He turns, his expression cold and determined. The leader is stunned, wondering how it's possible to dodge a bullet imbued with an acceleration spell. Frantically reloading, he realizes with dawning horror that Oscar didn't dodge at all. He frantically questions if Oscar used a shield to block the shot. In a flash, Oscar appears and stops the leader's gun with a single finger. The leader stammers in disbelief, unable to comprehend how a low-rank mage could possess such power. How? With a flick of his finger, Oscar sends a shockwave through the leader, coldly asking if he'd even understand the explanation. Who? Oscar exhales, a bead of sweat on his face as he looks at his hand after the fight. He walks over to the fallen leader's body, remarking on the annoying weapon he used. Examining the gun, Oscar identifies its 3 enchantments, acceleration, enhancement, and penetration, as the trinity the leader boasted about. He admits the weapon was amazing and surprisingly difficult to counter. A diagram reveals Oscar's countermeasure. He enhanced his windshield with friction reduction and internal durability, causing the bullet to slip off the flexible exterior. Walking away, Oscar admits he was lucky not to be on the floor. He resolves to study modern weapons and acknowledges the limits of his current, incomplete body. With renewed determination, he grips the captured gun and sprints off, knowing he must save Frank and Ivan first. Having dealt with 3 of the assassins, Oscar knows there is still one left to find. He worries, desperately hoping Frank can hold out just a little longer. In the woods, the 4th mercenary has found Frank and Ivan. Frank urges Ivan to escape, reassuring the elder that he is strong enough to handle this himself. He explains that he can't fight properly with Ivan nearby and promises he will catch up soon, as the 4th mercenary watches from the shadows. Ivan reluctantly agrees, telling Frank to be careful before running for safety. Kehek. The mercenary mocks Frank's touching farewell and asks why he didn't chase Ivan, realizing Frank is his new target. PF'd. The mercenary scoffs, asking if Frank really sent the old man away to sacrifice himself for his own survival. As Frank glares silently, the mercenary admits he's curious what makes a mage from the Great Tower so special. The mercenary lunges forward, swinging his sword at Frank. He roars that he wants to kill Frank first. Frank effortlessly parries the powerful sword strike with a simple wave of his hand. He calmly unleashes his own spell, Windcutter. Wow, the mercenary is impressed, as he narrowly dodges the swift blade of wind. Grinning, he blocks the magic with his sword, getting a feel for Frank's power. Do something more fun, he taunts, suddenly plunging a hidden dagger into Frank's chest. K-ha-ha. Mercenary laughs maniacally, believing he's landed the killing blow. WH. He's suddenly confused, realizing the feeling of piercing a heart shouldn't be so light. A look of panic crosses his face as he realizes something is terribly wrong. Before he can react, a hand strikes him squarely on the throat. The mercenary collapses, gasping for air as Frank stands over him and apologizes. As the mercenary chokes on the ground, Frank repeats his apology. A mysterious blue message reveals Frank's secret. I have a bit of a unique constitution. Frank clenches his fist, a swirling green orb of energy gathering in his palm. Yikes! Frank looks down at the defeated mercenary with a grimace. Frank looks down in shock, realizing he nearly stepped on the defeated mercenary as Oscar approaches from behind, gun in hand. From behind a tree, Oscar reflects that Frank is a special mage. As Oscar's hand swirls with magic, he reveals Frank as a god of wind, possessing the rare ability to turn his body intangible. Oscar muses that this skill makes Frank immune to physical attacks, a legendary power even the former Tower Master only knew from ancient books. He realizes with a shock that this innate magic belonged to the 7th Tower Master, and Frank has inherited his god of wind. Frank jumps as Oscar suddenly appears behind him, calling his name. Startled, Frank asks when he arrived, and Oscar replies he just got there, congratulating him on a job well done. Oscar gently chides Frank for celebrating before finding Ivan, prompting Frank to remember the old man with a start. Panicking, Frank frantically calls out for Ivan as Oscar watches him with a thoughtful expression. Oscar notes Frank's immense potential, then senses Ivan's energy nearby and tells Frank it's time to go. As dawn breaks, they arrive back at the cabin, where Ivan greets them with a simple, "Thank you." Overcome with emotion, Ivan gives Frank a powerful hug, thanking him for saving his life, much to Frank's flustered confusion. Oscar corrects Ivan, explaining that he missed one of the attackers and Frank was the one who saved the day, adding a formal Latin phrase. As Ivan pats a blushing Frank on the head, Oscar watches with a warm, knowing smile. Frank asks if the danger is finally over, but Oscar sits down, gravely admitting that it's not exactly finished. At the table, Ivan asks why a man named Powell is obsessed with this land, explaining it's the best and largest plot in all of Siren. Ivan reveals the land is threatened by pollution from magic engineering factories in the western region that dump waste into the Balf River. He worries that if Powell builds even more factories nearby, the land will be ruined forever. With a grim expression, Ivan concludes that if Siren's soil dies, he won't even be able to grow herbs, as Oscar listens intently. Oscar turns to Ivan, stating he has a question for the elder. When Oscar asks about the herb village, Ivan is stunned that he knows of such a place. Ivan begins his story with a flashback of villagers with torches hunting down herbalists. He explains that in the past, herbalists were misunderstood and even called witches for their strange practices. To survive, the herbalists were forced to live a nomadic life, constantly on the run. Then, one day, a savior appeared before them in a flash of light. The savior is revealed to be the White Tower's fourth tower master, Reinald Ice. Reinald Ice offers the persecuted herbalists a permanent and respected home in Siren. Oscar's expression is serious and intense as he absorbs the history of his predecessor. Ivan is moved by the tale, while Oscar claims he read it in a storybook, privately recalling it was from a book exclusive to Tower Masters. Ivan reflects on how the nomads finally found a home, and Frank realizes the White Tower's deep connection to the land. Ivan smiles with deep pride, stating that the White Tower gifted his ancestors a home and their dignity. Deeply moved, Oscar bows to Ivan, thanking him for his people's hard work through the generations. Looking up with renewed hope, Ivan declares that the White Tower will be with them from now on. Oscar declares the Imperial family will swiftly punish Powell for attacking a cultural asset, but Ivan fears he can't wait, prompting a flustered Frank to ask for his touchedness back. Elsewhere, a man in a white suit frantically packs, cursing someone for messing up his work and forcing him to flee into bankruptcy. "After we run, you're done for," he snarls, determined to get away. Devore Powell hastily shoves gold bars into a case when a shadow falls over him. Suddenly surrounded, Powell is ordered not to move by armed security agents. In a flash, a blade slices through the agents' guns, leaving Powell staring in disbelief. A man in a black uniform stands over the fallen Devore Powell, who is shocked to see the senior superintendent of national security. The senior superintendent presents a warrant, stunning Powell into silence. Powell desperately claims they have the wrong man, but the superintendent coldly tells him to shut his mouth and orders the arrest. Panicked, Powell realizes he's trapped unless he can contact a certain powerful person for help. Trying to buy time, he smirks and asks if they'll at least let him have one last cigar. The superintendent flatly denies his request and orders his men to cuff him and drag him away. Powell angrily demands to know if the superintendent is aware of who's backing him, but the man simply replies, "I don't know." Powell boasts that the emperor himself supports him, but his threat falls on deaf ears. The superintendent calmly plucks the cigar from Powell's hand, leaving him trembling in defeat. Suck. Taking a puff, the superintendent notes that criminals have good taste as he surveys the tied-up men. An associate asks him a question. A subordinate asks why they moved so quickly on this case, and the senior superintendent reveals it was an order from above. The senior superintendent explains the emperor's love for the White Tower is an adult situation, leaving his subordinate, Dolan, confused. He sighs, admitting he doesn't understand the emperor's affection, since the tower's heroic achievements were 20 years ago. He compares the White Tower to a bird with broken wings, stating it no longer has the right to such special treatment. He asks Dolan his age and, upon hearing he's 23, points out that he was only a child when the tower was in its prime. A flashback shows the innocent face of a young boy 20 years ago. Crowds cheered as humanity celebrated its victory over the demons, finally achieving freedom. The narrator wonders about the true status and power of the White Tower during that historic era. The people look up in awe at the White Tower, a shining symbol of their hard-won victory. Back in the present, the superintendent crushes his cigar, explaining that the higher-ups are still bound by those old memories and expectations. He tells a surprised Dolan their day isn't over yet, as they have one more place to stop. He dismisses the other agents and declares he and Dolan are heading west to order the factories near the Bulf River to stop dumping pollutants. He adds this to the schedule, musing that even without knowing the tower's history, he knows the names Oscar Crusian and Frank Sirius. As they hurry off, Dolan sheepishly asks if they can stop for food along the way. Elsewhere, a voice celebrates that a task is finally over as a magical device hovers in the sunset sky. A blue-haired mage is invited by his colleague to report to the Vice Tower Master, but he suggests they get drinks instead. The blue-haired mage panics at the thought of meeting the Vice Tower Master and seeing Oscar and Frank. He makes a hasty excuse that he has plans and quickly rushes off, leaving his colleague bewildered. The colleague meets the Vice Tower Master, who asks if he saw Frank, and the colleague confirms Frank just left in a hurry. The Vice Tower Master jokes about Frank's urgency before seriously commending Oscar for resolving another huge incident. He summons Oscar to his room to give a full report, and they head off together. Oscar and the Vice Tower Master ride a lift in a tense, silent atmosphere. Oscar notices the Vice Tower Master seems unusually depressed and wonders what's wrong. The Elder asks if Oscar has heard from Frank, and Oscar confirms that he has. When Oscar asks what's wrong, the Vice Tower Master reveals he received a message from the Sirius family announcing they're taking Frank back. Oscar is shocked and asks if Frank agreed to leave the tower, but the Elder is unsure. The Vice Tower Master adds that the family claims they have already finished their discussions with Frank. Oscar stands in stunned silence, processing the heavy news. Knock, knock. In his room, Frank packs a bag and calls out, asking if Gronk has arrived. A voice from the doorway asks for Grank, youngest son of the greatest trading company in the Empire, Frank Sirius. Frank turns to find Oscar at his door and realizes with annoyance that he must have heard everything. Cornered, Frank admits he's leaving the tower to return to his family's company and get married, apologizing for not saying it sooner. Oscar asks about the sudden marriage, and Frank explains it's a strategic arrangement with a good family that will benefit his own. Oscar asks if he's okay with a strategic marriage, but Frank brushes it off, saying she's a good match. Oscar clarifies his real question. Is Frank okay with giving up on magic? Frank looks away, resigned, saying he has to accept the limits of his own talent. Oscar refutes this, saying Frank is wrong and simply doesn't understand the reality of his own potential. As Frank tries to rationalize leaving, Oscar sternly cuts him off by saying his full name, Frank Sirius. Frank defensively asks why Oscar is being so intense, but Oscar simply tells him, "You're talented." Frank is visibly moved, his eyes widening at the unexpected praise. He thanks Oscar sarcastically, but Oscar is serious, asking if he wants to truly test his talent. Before Frank can answer, his white-haired brother appears in the doorway behind Oscar, calling his name. Frank is shocked to see his brother has arrived. The brother, assuming Oscar is just a colleague, gives Frank 5 minutes to say his goodbyes. As his brother waits, Oscar turns to him and bluntly asks, "How much?" He clarifies his offer, asking for the price for Frank to stay at the tower. The brother scoffs, asking who Oscar is to make such a demand, and Oscar introduces himself as Frank's friend. The white-haired brother gives Oscar a cold, dismissive look. He is identified as Grank Sirius, the oldest son of the Sirius family and the trading company's vice leader. Oscar offers Gronk a deal, prompting a protest from Frank, while Gronk mocks Oscar's impudence. Oscar and Grank face off, with Oscar confidently promising a deal that will benefit them both. Oscar holds up 2 fingers, proposing a deal that will greatly benefit the family, stunning a shocked Frank. Grank scoffs at the idea of Frank becoming a top mage in 2 years and demands to know the penalty for failure. Oscar asserts he has the authority and will use the Vice Tower Master as a notary, while Frank protests being left out of the conversation. Gronk questions Oscar's motives, asking if he's doing this out of friendship or because Frank is truly worthy. Oscar pauses for a moment, considering his answer as Frank looks on anxiously. He declares firmly that it's because Frank is worthy, leaving Frank visibly moved. Oscar reveals his grand plan to restore the White Tower's reputation within 5 years, using the new medicine as the opening shot. Gronk startles Frank, by grabbing his shoulder and declaring that Frank is essential to his vision for the new White Tower. Oscar admits Grank is young, but states that as a merchant, he must seize the opportunity presented by his opponent's naivete. Gronk acknowledges the offer is good, but adds a condition, claiming Oscar has forgotten something important. He explains that human merchants value trust over money and demands that Oscar prove himself worthy of a deal. Gronk issues a challenge. Tomorrow at noon, Oscar must fight his level 5 knight to prove his abilities, shocking the level 2 mage. Grank adds that the knight can't use sword chi, and Oscar realizes the family's strategic marriage must be with someone powerful. Grank says his goodbyes, warning Oscar that not showing up will be considered a surrender. Frank panics, saying even he would struggle against a level 5 knight, and offers to go cancel the deal for Oscar. Oscar stops Frank, realizing Grank is just angry and wants him beaten up, while Frank offers to go with him out of embarrassment. Oscar confidently says it's doable, shocking Frank, who argues that only a level 4 mage could fight a level 5 knight. Frank asks if Oscar plans to reach level 4 in a single day, but Oscar says that's impossible, and he has another plan. Oscar grabs a startled Frank with a confident grin. Oscar reveals a loophole. Grank said to prove his abilities, not that he had to win the fight himself, so he can just put on a show. He gets Frank's full attention by calling out his full name, Frank Sirius. With a determined smile, Oscar declares that he will make Frank into a level 4 mage. He then commands Frank to fight for him in the upcoming duel. Frank is doubtful, having been unable to level up for years, but Oscar assures him it's possible with complete trust, which Frank gives. Oscar instructs Frank to circulate his mana, revealing a glowing diagram of his internal energy flow. After observing the flow, Oscar nods in approval, calling it good. He then pokes Frank in 3 specific spots on his chest and stomach. Oscar explains these are areas of mana loss that lower his magic's completion, a flaw only Oscar can perceive. Annoyed, Frank asks if fixing that will let him level up, but Oscar says 99.9% of mages wouldn't even care about such a detail. He then reveals that the 0.1% who become archmages all cared and tells Frank to practice his instructions every morning. A bewildered Chibi Frank is bombarded with complex instructions on mana circuits and flow from 2 Chibi Oscars. Frank asks if that's all, but Oscar tells him to demonstrate something else for him right now. Flinch. Oscar asks him to use the intangible magic from the herb field, making Frank tense up. Frank refuses, and when Oscar reminds him of his promise to trust him, he insists it's not about a lack of trust. Frank admits he is simply scared, which concerns Oscar. He reveals that he almost died using that magic before. Frank recalls studying a magic book, trying to create a spell that no one else could replicate. He remembers his revolutionary idea. What if his entire body, not just a part of it, could turn into wind? The thought that he could become incredibly strong with such a power filled him with excitement. He vividly recalls the moment of discovery, his body beginning to glow with magical energy. He admits it was a reckless thought as he recklessly attempted the transformation. He remembers his initial belief that he had succeeded. A flashback shows his eyes wide with terror as the spell went wrong. He realized with horror that he couldn't stop the out-of-control magic. Panic sets in as the wind swirls violently around his terrified face. He admits grimly that the attempt was a complete failure. In the memory, he screams for help as the chaotic magic completely overwhelms him. Frank recalls his helplessness, feeling his soul shatter into thousands of pieces and fade away. He trembles, clutching his chest at the painful memory. Oscar points out that he used it well on the hill, and Frank explains that it now activates automatically in dangerous situations. Frank asks if his past failure makes him pathetic, but Oscar firmly tells him not to think that way. Oscar explains that many mages face such problems, and, to Frank's surprise, says the solution is simple. Oscar identifies the issue as Frank's mana control, but Frank argues that control is based on talent and can't be supplemented. Oscar disagrees, stating there's a way to forcefully increase that ability as he picks up a piece of chalk. As Oscar draws a complex magic circle, a panicked Frank asks if he's crazy, declaring that demons won't come for him. A powerful summoning chant for a wind spirit appears, aimed at driving away evil and darkness. Frank dramatically recites the chant, requesting the spirit of wind to appear before him. After a moment of silence, Oscar bluntly tells him it's not working, because his affinity with spirits is terrible. When Frank asks if he felt a breeze, Oscar deadpans that it was just his sigh. Gosh. A blushing Frank clenches his fist in embarrassment while Oscar tells him not to be disappointed, as spirit affinity is rare. Frank panics, asking if he's doomed without a spirit, but Oscar calmly assures him there's another method. Oscar recalls a spirit summoning ceremony he learned from elves in a past life, which he tried just for fun and succeeded. As Frank wonders what to do next, Oscar tells him to move aside so he can try. Oscar steps calmly into the center of the summoning circle. The scene flashes back to a gathering of elves before the colossal world tree. A magic circle glows with the words, "Spirit of Wind." Oscar simply commands, "Come to me." The intense eyes of a green-haired spirit appear. Kick, a powerful gust of wind knocks Frank back as he yells in shock that Oscar succeeded on the first try. A voice from within the wind asks, "Oh ho, human, is that you?" A mighty, bearded, green-haired spirit materializes, asking if Oscar is the one who called him. Oscar stands calmly, facing the swirling vortex of power emanating from the spirit. Oscar confirms he was the one who summoned the spirit 27 years ago too, and now asks to form a contract. The giant spirit materializes fully, dismissing the need for a formal contract. The highest-ranking spirit, Celestin, offers a connection of friendship, but Oscar flatly says no. Both the spirit and Frank are bewildered by his refusal, but Oscar says he should have started with his real intention. With a grin, Oscar points to a shocked Chibi Frank, effectively offering him up for the contract instead. On the day of the duel, Brink confirms with Oscar that he agrees to the deal, which Oscar accepts despite his concerns. Gronk calls the inventor of the cure stubborn, and Oscar smirks, saying he'll gladly take the offer. Frank introduces his level 5 knight Lazily Morgan, and Oscar introduces himself as a level 2 mage. The rules are simple. The first person to take the opponent's necklace wins. The two necklaces are displayed with the added condition that it's Oscar's loss if 5 minutes pass without a victor. Gronk agrees to the terms and asks if Oscar will be okay fighting in his uncomfortable-looking outfit. Oscar smiles confidently, his robes flapping dramatically, and says it's fine. He steps back, coolly stating that he's not the one fighting anyway. To everyone's surprise, Frank steps forward, his aura flaring with power and determination. A shocked Grank yells Frank's name, demanding to know what Oscar is doing. Oscar explains the loophole, stating Grank asked him to prove his ability, not fight personally, and he trained Frank yesterday. Gronk glares, admitting his mistake in the wording, but warning that they won't go easy on Frank. Oscar clarifies he's simply putting a level 4 mage forward for a better chance, leaving Grank stunned at how Frank leveled up overnight. Oscar leans in close to Frank with a confident grin, saying he needs to show off this much ability. Grank gives his knight a knowing look, and the knight says he understands. Ouch, Oscar grips Frank's shoulder, telling him not to be scared and assuring him of victory if he follows his instructions. Frank looks back with a determined half-smile and agrees. Frank walks forward to face his opponent, his necklace displayed prominently. The knight, Sir Lazily, politely greets Frank as young master, and they face each other on the dueling floor. A hand drops, signaling the start of the match. The knight moves with blinding speed, his path marked by a swift blur across the floor. Frank's eyes widen in shock at the knight's incredible speed. The knight's sword is instantly at Frank's throat, its tip glowing with a deadly aura. Frank feels the crushing pressure of the level 5 knight, marveling at his power even without sword chi. Looming over him, the knight lazily points his sword at Frank, a silent threat of overwhelming power. Overwhelmed by fear, Frank trembles and thinks he can't possibly do this. Just as Frank falters, a flashback shows Oscar's hand stopping him with a jolt. In that memory, Oscar's voice reminds him that he is essential for the future of the new White Tower. Oscar also recalls a past incident, telling Frank that his unique perception saved them from a hidden swordsman. His resolve hardened, Frank unleashes a powerful blast of wind magic. With new determination, Frank thinks, "Let's do this." Moved that for the first time, someone truly needed him. He vows not to let Oscar's expectations down, and lunges into the fight. Clang. The knight easily deflects Frank's magical attacks. Sir Lazily is impressed, noting that Frank has gotten better, is dual casting, and even managed to disperse his momentum. Frank wonders if this is the true potential of his wind magic. But the knight easily parries another attack, proving his superior strength. A blade of wind flies through the air towards its target. The knight declares that he's done observing as wind blades surround him. With a fierce look, Sir Lazily rushes forward to attack. Frank is knocked off his feet. Caught by surprise, stunned by the knight's speed, Frank desperately tries to figure out how to block the next assault. He quickly prepares to cast a windblade spell. Whoosh! Frank summons a powerful gust of wind to defend against the knight's charge. Gronk watches in disbelief, asking Oscar if he used a forbidden method to make Frank so strong overnight. The Vice Tower Master assures Grank it was a safe method, while Grank scoffs, pretending not to be worried. The knight finds himself caught in a powerful whirlwind, impressed by Frank's growth. Kook! Frank strains, struggling to maintain the intense spell. With a mighty swing, the knight cleaves through the magical vortex. Frank is thrown back by the overwhelming force of the knight's counterattack. An onlooker muses that, while rapid growth might hurt someone weaker like Frank, perhaps the pain is a welcome relief. As Frank falls, the knight's gauntlet reaches for his necklace. The knight's hand closes, but the necklace is already gone. Watching from the side, the Vice Tower Master calmly announces, "It's over." Gronk's eye widens in utter shock at the sudden turn of events. Stunned, his only thought is, why? Grank notices Oscar smirking and wonders what he's so pleased about. In a flashback to the previous night, Oscar confirms the spirit transplant was a success, asking a tired Frank how his God of Wind feels now. Oscar explains that Frank can't fully turn to wind yet because he hasn't overcome his past trauma. Frank sits up, listening intently, and questions if he's at 100% capacity. Oscar mentions there's still the most interesting part of the God of Wind magic to learn. He draws on a chalkboard, revealing the spell's true overpowered ability, unitization. Oscar explains that unitization can turn anything touching Frank's body into wind, which Frank notes is an absurdly powerful ability. A thought bubble reveals the thrill of winning a battle of wits and strategy. In the present, Frank's hand blurs as he moves with impossible speed, enveloped in wind. His eyes are sharp, with intense focus. The knight looks down in shock, realizing his own necklace is missing. Frank now holds the knight's red necklace in his hand. He looks down, stunned by his own success. A close-up shows the knight's red pendant in Frank's gloved hand. The red necklace now rests on Frank's chest, a symbol of his victory. Yay! Overcome with joy, Frank cheers, screaming, "I got it!" Frank realizes in horror that Frank used the God of Wind magic, a feat considered impossible. The Vice Tower Master declares the match concluded and asks a stunned Grank if he agrees with the result, while Oscar smiles knowingly. Oscar commends Frank on a job well done, while Grank watches in disbelief that such growth came from just one day of training. Gronk concedes defeat as his knight, Sir Leslie, respectfully shakes hands with Frank. As they depart, Grank expresses regret at their quick exit, but Oscar simply asks that he look after his younger brother, Frank. Grank looks at Frank with grudging respect, admitting to himself that the boy has grown a bit. He dismisses a shame-faced Sir Leslie, telling him to forget about the loss. Frank stands by silently, his gaze turned away from his brother. With a private smirk, Oscar thinks to himself that Frank is a funny guy. Overjoyed and blushing, Frank clutches his chest, basking in the glow of his victory. His joy evaporates into shock as Oscar confirms his fears with a simple yup. Pointing to a dark staircase, a horrified Frank yells that it's the basement prison, not a training room. Frank protests his isolated training, but is told the Vice Tower Master himself ordered it, signifying his high expectations. Outraged at the command, Frank is told to think positively, as he needs time to adjust to his new spirit and level 4 powers. Wah! A subordinate pushes a protesting Frank down the stairs, telling him not to be a baby. A tearful Frank peeks from the closing door as Oscar firmly says goodbye. With a hint of guilt, Oscar thinks to himself, sorry. A thought bubble reveals the truth. Oscar was the one who requested Frank's isolated training. In a flashback, the Vice Tower Master questions sending Frank to isolated training for 30 days, but Oscar insists it's necessary. The Vice Tower Master chuckles, agreeing to the plan and mentioning he has some good news. Oscar is intrigued to hear that the Sirius Trading Company will be providing something for free. Oscar deduces their business strategy. The potential profit if the White Tower revives is endless, making their intentions clear. The Vice Tower Master moves on to a second piece of news, saying he has a request for Oscar. He asks if Oscar would be willing to take on a lecture, surprising him. Oscar thoughtfully considers the proposition. Sip. Taking a drink, he wonders why he's being asked to lecture instead of focusing on the potions department. He asks if there's an urgent reason for the White Tower Mages to get stronger so quickly. The Vice Tower Master asks if he's heard of Mage Night, which Oscar confirms he has. The title Mage Knight appears in an ornate, celestial design. It's explained as a gathering of all magic towers to display their growth and harmony. The Emperor's original intent was for the event to create bonds between the towers. However, the event always devolved into fierce fighting between the mages. Oscar wonders why the long-cancelled event is being brought up now. He correctly guesses that the Emperor is trying to revive Mage Knight. The Vice Tower Master confirms it, adding that he has a bad feeling, being particularly wary of the Black Tower. He worries that as long as the Black Tower vies for power, the White Tower will be a target, leaving him uneasy. Oscar's expression darkens with intensity, his fist clenching, as the Vice Tower Master silently notes his change in demeanor. Walking alone, Oscar reaffirms his resolve to protect the White Tower from the arrogant Black Tower, relieved he got Franck to level 4. He's thankful the spirit ceremony worked, surprised a demigod would remember a promise-breaking human like him. In a flashback, the spirit Celestine furiously objects to being summoned for someone else's contract, but Oscar calmly tells him to cool it. Arr! The giant spirit points accusingly at a nonplussed Oscar. A memory surfaces of a long-haired white mage who instructs someone to let her know. In that memory, Oscar's past self declares that the white mage is back. Back in the summoning, Celestine is enraged that Oscar dared to invoke the Spirit King's name. A divine being with a butterfly mask appears, surrounded by light, and demands to know who Oscar is. Celestine sweats nervously, humbled in the presence of the Spirit King. He marvels that a mere human was able to make the Spirit King issue a command. Celestine reluctantly informs Oscar that the Spirit King has allowed the power transplant. He then relays a personal message from the Spirit King to Oscar. Standing before the prison door again, Oscar reflects that he saved many White Tower families, thanks to the spirit's help. Vowing to repay the spirit with interest, he posts a notice for a special lecture he will hold. Oscar holds the announcement, ready to put the next phase of his plan into motion. A red-haired mage smirks, greeting his classmates with a sarcastic remark about thinking they had all died. Looking around the lecture hall, he scoffs at the low-level attendees, wondering where the intermediate mages are. A pink-haired mage excitedly whispers that the White Tower must be rich, since the Vice Tower Master personally invited the lecturer to the main building. Her blonde friend agrees, both gushing that the lecturer must be someone incredible to be teaching in such a prestigious hall. A condescending voice tells them not to make him laugh, catching their attention. A blonde-haired mage with red eyes, Demian proud, dismisses their excitement over using an empty lecture hall. The pink-haired mage gently chides Demian for being so negative, saying it's good the tower is finally investing in something. Demian retorts that a real investment would be a high-level lecture, not a reinterpretation of basic magic. He gestures to the room, pointing out that almost every low-level mage showed up, proving the class is for beginners. As Demian begins to mock the noble level 2 genius, a firm voice cuts him off, commanding an end to the chatter. The students are shocked into silence, looking around for the source of the voice. The red-haired mage clutches his throat, realizing he's been silenced by a spell. As a pair of boots enters the room, a new voice offers a polite greeting. The lecturer steps into view, introducing himself as Oscar Crusian. The students stare in disbelief that a level 2 mage is their lecturer, and Oscar calmly acknowledges their disappointment. Annoyed, the red-haired mage fumes that a lower-level senior is teaching them, believing Oscar silenced them out of guilt. The red-haired mage looks on in surprise. Standing at the front of the room, Oscar announces that he has a condition for them. He flips an hourglass, challenging them to prove they are too skilled for his lecture. Within the time limit, they must verbally declare that they don't want to take his class. Oscar gives a confident smirk, asking if the task isn't simple. The students groan, realizing he's trapped them by magically preventing them from speaking. The students realize this is a test. Since he is only level 2, the spell must be solvable. Demian understands the challenge. If they can't break the spell to speak, they're not good enough to skip the class. Oscar watches with a knowing smile, having deliberately left weaknesses in the spell that won't be easy to find. As sand drains from the hourglass, he looks over the silent students and asks if no one is up to the task. Demian slams his hands on the desk, triumphantly shouting, "I did it!" Oscar looks back, surprised that the boy listed as a beginner-level mage succeeded. He recalls Demian Proud's file, noting his brilliant mind but stubborn as a mule personality. Oscar congratulates him, and Demian boasts that it was so easy he had to intentionally slow down. As other students near a breakthrough, Oscar lifts the hourglass, announcing that time is up and only Demian passed. Ha! Demian smugly asks if he can leave, and Oscar grants his request. Now that he's free to go, Demian hesitates, suddenly curious about the class but too proud to admit he wants to stay. Oscar sees through Demian's transparent thoughts and offers him a prize, a personal lesson on one spell. He invites Demian to the stage and asks for his favorite basic spell, which Demian names as Windcutter. Demian confidently channels wind magic into his hand. He summons several small wind blades, asking if his display is sufficient. Impressed, Oscar smiles and says he will teach Demian how to cast a proper Windcutter. Oscar demonstrates his own spell, telling a shocked Demian that his version isn't a true Windcutter, but a half-baked imitation. Grasping Demian's spell, Oscar identifies two problems, shocking the boy. With a simple clench of his fist, he shatters Demian's magical blade. Oscar explains that other elements are absolute, but wind is simply moving air. A light bulb goes off for Demian, who realizes he created an air cutter, not a true wind cutter. The class listens intently as Oscar explains that the White Tower's magic must be in a state of continuous flow. He reiterates his point, warning that stagnant magic will always be destroyed, just as he demonstrated. A tiny Oscar muses that Demian wastes a lot of mana, while Demian wonders how he could know that from a single glance. Oscar politely asks if he can be a bit obtrusive. He deduces that as a child, Demian must have tried to copy a more advanced mage's Windcutter spell. To succeed, the young Demian likely forced the spell to work by using an excessive amount of mana. Oscar concludes that the bad habit of overpowering spells with mana has stuck with him ever since, leaving Demian stunned by his accuracy. Oscar notes it's a shame Demian will miss the class, just when he's about to perfect his spell. HMPH. Turning back, a flustered Demian insists he never said he wasn't taking the class. Oscar smirks triumphantly as a nervous Demian realizes he's been played. Later, rumors begin to spread about the lecturer Oscar Crusian. A blue-haired student stirring his tea enthusiastically declares that Oscar is a complete star instructor. His friends are skeptical, but he reveals that even level 4 and 5 mages are attending Oscar's elementary-level class. Convinced, his friends eagerly agree to go to the lecture right away. A female student notes it's only 7 a.m., but her companion insists they must line up early to get a spot. The students silently leave their table. Heading for the lecture, the group of mages walks purposefully toward the lecture hall. In the crowded hall, the students are stunned to see so many people, including numerous high-level seniors. OMG. They are even more shocked to spot Elder Maxim in the audience, realizing this is no ordinary class. Oscar enters the packed room, welcoming the students and highlighting the importance of the day's lesson. The class erupts with excitement as Oscar promises to teach them the most important spell for any mage. Their excitement quickly fades into confused silence. The students groan, disappointed that the lesson is on the most basic of basics, a perceived waste of time. Elder Maxim stands and interrupts, demanding to know if Oscar gathered everyone just to teach basic wind magic. Oscar confirms with a simple yes, and cheekily asks the Elder to demonstrate his wind magic for the class. A powerful wind from Elder Maxim blasts through the classroom, buffeting the students. The students are amazed, questioning how he summoned pure wind without it being a gust or a press spell. Whoa! Oscar thanks the Elder for the impressive display as the class looks on in awe. He then calls on a nervous blonde student, Amy Ravine, asking her to demonstrate her own wind spell. Panicked and flustered, Amy casts a gentle wind spell, wondering why she was chosen. Her fellow students find the resulting breeze to be soft and warm. Oscar poses a question to the class, asking if they can identify the difference between the two spells. Students call out their guesses, suggesting differences in force, range, temperature, and the mana's temperament. A brown-haired woman, Veronica Fricks, is startled when Oscar correctly identifies her and confirms her answer. Oscar praises Veronica, explaining that the spells from Elder Maxim and Amy Ravine differ in the temperament of their mana. He describes the Elder's spell as a hot desert wind, and Amy's as a soft spring breeze. Pointing out the vast difference, he moves on to his next question for the class. He asks who understands mana's temperament, correcting a student who confuses it with the 4 systems of mana. At the chalkboard, Oscar draws symbols for the white and blue towers, asking why both are considered representatives of balance. A student correctly guesses it's because of their elemental traits, which Oscar confirms. He illustrates his point by explaining that elements like fire and lightning lack opposing temperatures like cold fire. However, he notes a key distinction between the towers, summoning a ball of water to demonstrate. Oscar explains that boiling water is simple, requiring only specific conditions of temperature and pressure. In contrast, he shows that creating hot wind is even simpler. The students suddenly feel a wave of heat, though some in the back remain cold. Smiling, Oscar declares that wind is the most free element of all. He explains that unlike water, which can't mix with oil, wind has no such limitations. It is the only element, he says, that can possess any temperament based solely on the mage's imagination. He urges the White Tower mages to be deeply aware of how they think about and view their wind. Concluding the core point of his lesson, Oscar turns his attention to the elder. Wind. Wait. Oscar's expression sharpens, sensing a sudden change. As the elder falls into a trance, Oscar asks if he's all right, only for the man to shout, "Number." The elder has a revelation, certain that he has grasped a profound truth. As his mana flares, he fiercely warns everyone, "Don't touch him." Oscar quickly orders the students to stay back, realizing the elder is on the verge of an enlightenment. A crimson aura surrounds Elder Maxim as he sinks into a deep, meditative state. Oscar asks the elder how he is, and the glowing mage admits that while he didn't reach level 8, he feels something new. Overjoyed, Elder Maxim grabs Oscar in a tight hug, thanking him profusely for the lesson. Ha 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 ha. While being hugged, Oscar muses that with the elder on his side, no lower-level mages will dare challenge his lessons. His greatest profit from the lecture, he thinks, is something else entirely. The name Veronica Fricks appears as he recalls her face in the crowd. He reflects that he's finally caught the attention of one of the problem children listed in his past self's journal. Later, Oscar remembers Veronica mentioning something interesting in the training room and heads there. In a flashback, Veronica asks Oscar if he trains and why he isn't in the fit room rankings, but he doesn't know what that is. He walks, realizing Veronica's pitying look came from his ignorance of the future innovation training room, and now he needs to know why. He stops, having arrived at his destination. Standing before an ornate door, he notes that only 3 of the tower's 300 training rooms look this special. He touches the door, questioning the need for a physical touch when a magic door would be simpler. The doors swing open into a grand room, and he pauses thoughtfully on an elaborate rug. As a disembodied voice greets him, Oscar wonders about the room's distinct vibe. The voice introduces itself as Argo, a next-generation training system, making Oscar realize the room uses magic engineering. He scowls, suspecting the Golden Tower is profiting from this. As Argo explains, he'll receive a customized course upon registration. Argo denies his registration, forcing him to train as an unregistered user and select a level from 1 to 100. The system acknowledges his understanding and summons 3 large, iridescent orbs. Argo explains that the test is to pop the 3 balls with any attack. Bang! Before Argo can finish warning against wide area spells, Oscar instantly pops all 3, passing level 1. Smirking, Oscar finds the test easy and decides to raise the difficulty, telling Argo to select a new level. He confidently chooses level 100, prompting a warning from the system about the increased speed, hostility, and decreased size of the balls. After a final warning for vulnerable individuals, Oscar dismisses the caution and tells the system to proceed. He stretches his neck, casually wondering what could be so dangerous about the challenge. His expression sharpens as he senses the trial beginning. Surrounded by countless smaller balls, Oscar is warned that using a wide area spell or getting hit more than 10 times will result in failure. He begins the trial, casting Wind Cutter. Pop pop. He nimbly dodges and weaves, destroying the orbs with focused magic. While successfully popping the balls, he realizes he'll quickly run out of mana at this rate. He refocuses his mana, preparing a more efficient strategy. The balls suddenly glow with a menacing purple energy. He realizes making his attacks small and sharp is the most effective approach. He unleashes a barrage of precise magical strikes while dodging, but thinks this is far too difficult for a children's training program. He gracefully flips backward to evade a swarm of attacking orbs. Huff gasping for breath, Oscar kneels as the system announces he has passed level 100. He collapses onto the floor, Riley calling the grueling ordeal a good warm-up. Lying exhausted, he concludes that the standards for the current generation of mages are far higher than before. He resolves to work harder and build more muscle to keep up. As he opens the door to leave, he's surprised to find someone waiting, noting their early arrival. It's Veronica who asks why he came, surprised he didn't just ignore her suggestion. Oscar calmly states that healthy mana comes from a healthy body, confusing her as he wishes her luck and leaves. She watches him go, wondering if he ate something bad this morning. Annoyed, she wonders why he just quoted a famous saying from Oscar's sage as if it were his own. Entering the training room, Veronica tells Argo to start her on level 50 for a warm-up. She asks if there's been any change to the rankings, and is shocked when Argo confirms there has been. She demands to see the leaderboard, and is stunned to see AAA has taken first place, pushing her to third. Veronica asks who AAA is, but the system denies her request, citing personal information security. She's shocked to learn the new champion is below level 5 and broke the legendary Devil's 10 minutes record for the first time on the continent. Arg. Frustrated, she demands to know who it is, but Argo once again refuses to reveal the user's identity. Veronica voices her suspicion, asking if the top-ranked user is Oscar Crusian, but Argo stonewalls her, citing personal information security. As Oscar walks down a hall, wondering if his workout will leave him sore, Elder Maxim calls his name. The Elder greets Oscar, pleased to catch him, and says he has something important to discuss. Elder Maxim explains that according to Fidelina, market merchants are refusing to buy their potions, likely out of fear of the Azure Tower. The Elder entrusts the problem to Oscar, who internally seethes, already plotting how to get back at their rivals. Fuming silently, Oscar's foul mood is noticed by nearby students, who wonder if his personality has soured again. Later, Oscar intercepts 2 mail carriers, asking about their route as they head to Bell Road. As the carriers discuss whether to abandon their delivery business for potions, Oscar recognizes them as the Wind Riders. Oscar thoughtfully concludes that the delivery business is not a very profitable market. A narration explains the delivery business's drawbacks: low profit, high labor, and no political gain, but hints at a single hidden benefit. The 2 mail carriers encourage each other, focusing on the positive moments of their job to stay motivated. When one mentions that elderly customers often give them food, Oscar has a sudden, sharp realization. Oscar interrupts the surprised mail carriers to ask a question. Do they often bump into people during deliveries? After getting an affirmative, a scheming Oscar notes that they require a signature for every delivery. With a plan forming, Oscar grabs the mail carrier, his intense focus signaling a new strategy is in motion. Back in his office, Elder Maxim sits at his desk, waiting for Oscar to explain his plan. Dressed formally, a confident Oscar appears before the Elder and confirms his idea with a simple exactly. The Elder understands Oscar's plan to target consumers directly, but questions its feasibility, as their potions aren't for daily use. Dismissing the need for innovation, Oscar asks to borrow a pen and paper to illustrate his simple solution. As he begins to write, Oscar explains his plan starts with the White Tower's most effective mid-level recovery potion. He draws a diagram, proposing they modify the potion into 4 targeted formulas for different age groups and genders. Oscar suggests rebranding the potions into something more approachable, leaving a nervous Elder Maxim to ponder what to call the nutrient supplements. Elsewhere, an old man named Graham sits on a bench, lamenting his lack of energy as someone calls his name. The red-haired mail carrier cheerfully greets old man Graham, who notes the young man's popularity. The mail carrier delivers a letter, and Graham is relieved his friend is still alive, while the carrier jokes about the long-living generation. Feeling his age, Graham complains of aches and low energy, prompting the concerned mail carrier to ask if he's hurt. The mail carrier leans in, offering the old man something to try. When Graham asks what it is, the mail carrier proudly presents a small bottle, calling it the Magic Tower's latest creation. He reveals the tonic, a potion labeled S0. Graham skeptically questions the name S0 and asks what it means. The carrier explains it's a top-ranked tonic for seniors that boosts energy, but Graham scoffs, doubting it would help him. To convince him, the carrier shares an anecdote about another man with bad knees who is now hiking thanks to the tonic. The carrier whispers that the genius Oscar Crusian created it himself, and Graham faintly recognizes the name. Wary of the price for a genius's product, Graham learns a weekly bottle costs 30 bells. Outraged, Graham recalls being scammed by other ineffective tonics and declares he no longer trusts pharmacists. The carrier insists the White Tower is different and sweetens the deal by mentioning a special offer. Intrigued, Graham listens closely as the carrier confirms his address is in the Siren District. The carrier presents a limited time offer for Siren residents. a 1-year subscription at half price, with weekly deliveries and no interest payments. Graham considers the deal, thinking he can afford it with a few cutbacks, but the carrier clinches it by offering the first bottle for free. Gulp. Graham eagerly snatches the free bottle and drinks it, telling the laughing carrier he should have led with that. The next day, Graham wakes up in bed, surprised that his body feels unusually light. Astonished by the effect of a single bottle, he feels energetic enough to go for a bike ride. While out, Graham is greeted by a friend near a fountain. His friend jokes he thought Graham had passed away, but Graham retorts that he was just resting and won't die yet. Thok. At the chessboard, Graham declares checkmate, stunning his opponent, who asks if he's been training. Laughing, Graham says he feels 10 years younger and can focus much better than usual. His curious friends press him, asking if he found an elixir, and demand he share his secret. Graham reveals he tried a new tonic from the White Tower, and despite his friend's skepticism, he insists it's the real deal. Back at the tower, an aide bursts in shouting about trouble, and Oscar calmly asks if the potions have started to rot. The aide frantically confirms the potions will soon spoil, and slams a newspaper down for Oscar to see. Oscar reads a news article about the Azure Tower's winter sale, finding their attempt to compete rather cute, while Fidelina fumes in disbelief. Fidelina panics, realizing the Azure Tower is trying to drive them out of the market at a loss, but Oscar calmly assures her they won't last long. Still distressed, Fidelina worries that in a month they could be completely shut out of the potion market. Oscar calmly refutes her, explaining that being shut out is exactly the outcome the Azure Tower desires. He explains their rival's trap. If they use a recent disaster to sell potions, they'll be vilified, giving the Azure Tower a pretext to attack them. Fidelina asks if they should just accept defeat, but Oscar counters by asking about the amount of potions they have in storage. She confirms they have a massive surplus, and Oscar is satisfied that's good, only serves to annoy her further. Oscar presents a scroll, revealing it's the recipe for the Zero Tonic series, and proposes reprocessing their unsold potions. Holding the recipe aloft, he questions keeping unsold stock and confirms his plan to convert all their potions, shocking Fidelina. Oh ho! As Fidelina reads the plan, she realizes rebranding will make the products more accessible to families. Declaring his business mind scary, she resolves to never trust discounts again, as Oscar proposes spreading a rumor through the Information Guild. Oscar cheekily suggests spreading a rumor that the tonic boosts virility, which disgusts Fidelina, who questions if it will actually help sales. The scene transitions to the magnificent, sunlit spires of the Azure Tower. Inside, a purple-haired man named Moira Main smirks, declaring their plan a success and that they've completely stomped their competition. He confidently believes that the department head will be very satisfied with this outcome. Just then, the department head calls his name, and a nervous Moira Main turns to greet his superior. The Azure Tower's potion department head approaches Moira, grimly asking if he's seen the news. Moira smiles, confidently approaching his boss with the newspaper. Whack! The department head furiously slaps Moira across the face, demanding to know why he's smiling. Moira nervously confirms he's seen the paper as his boss points to it with a trembling hand. The department head roars in frustration, demanding to know why this is the best result Moira could achieve. Holding the paper, he furiously berates Moira for sacrificing all their profits for such a disastrous outcome. An article reveals the White Tower hit a jackpot with their S0 tonic business. The paper details the Zero series selling 10 million bottles, a men's version causing shortages, and their overall success as the department head realizes they're selling tonics, not potions. The department head trembles in confusion, realizing the tonics were never sold in the open market where he would have known about them. He finds an article detailing the White Tower's door-to-door sales and subscription model, exclaiming, that's why the sales weren't aggregated in market data. Reading Oscar's statement, mocking their sale, the department head erupts, realizing the White Tower's sale price was their real price all along. Moira watches a sales graph plummet, noting that the tonic bottle was a completely new, previously unsold product. The department head mocks Moira for celebrating a meaningless graph, explaining that now the public will actively seek out the White Tower's products. He continues, stating that no matter where the White Tower sells, the public will find them. The department head informs a stunned Moira that he will be very busy from now on. He coldly states that to recover the Azure Tower's losses, even having Moira work for free for life won't be enough. The scene shifts to the continent's east side, the Yan Dynasty, where a battle rages in a valley. A warrior with a topknot orders his men to block a massive, rampaging orc. He urgently commands them to set up the 9 Dragons Cloud Wind Formation. A warrior is sent flying by a powerful blow from the orc, horrifying his fellow swordsmen. The swordsmen look on in despair at the overwhelming attack. The monstrous orc roars, its red eyes glowing, as a warrior wonders what they can possibly do. A lone leaf floats down as one warrior remains focused, his gaze sharp. Looking up at the now inverted orc, he whispers, "Found it!" A hooded figure suddenly appears, ordering the beast to return to its territory peacefully. The figure continues the warning, if you don't want to. The red-haired person in the white hood declares they will be returned to dirt. A powerful spell is invoked. Restless Wind. Razor-sharp winds slice and bind the giant orc. The hooded mage notes that this keeps happening recently before asking the warrior if he is from the White Magic Tower. The hooded figure asks if he is Zhang Chun, and the warrior leader confirms his identity from the 9 Dragon sect. The figure lowers her hood, revealing a red-haired woman with striking red eyes. A caption introduces her as Shasha Meist, the White Tower's Tower Master. Shasha asks Zhang Chun if he brought what she requested from his sex leader, and he presents the Empire's newsletter. Shasha holds the newsletter, observing that it's been full of articles about the White Tower lately. She admits to herself that she's scared to read the news. She panics internally, worrying the tower has gone bankrupt or been kicked out of the 4 main magic towers. Her greatest fear is that if the tower has fallen, she'll never be able to see her master again. She finally forces herself to look, reading a headline about the White Tower's continuous success stories. Her eyes widen in complete and utter shock. She frantically flips through the newspaper, disbelieving what she's seeing. Stunned, Shasha asks Zhang Chun if the articles are a novel or if he fabricated them to protect her feelings. She's amazed the delivery business is doing so well, admitting she never intended for it to succeed. Shasha instructs a nervous Zhang Chun to deposit the commission fee into the Imperial bank account. She wonders what on earth is happening at the White Tower right now. Deciding she needs to see for herself, she leaps into the air, determined to check on the tower. Elsewhere, a startled Fidelina asks, "Huh?" as an off-screen voice tells her she's definitely a mage. From his desk, Oscar asks Fidelina what she's suddenly talking about. Fidelina reports that recovery potion sales have boomed and many cities are now requesting them, privately noting Oscar's discount strategy was a success. She adds that the military is ambivalent about switching suppliers, and Oscar internally agrees, knowing their loyalty lies with the Azure Tower. Oscar dismisses Fidelina, telling her she no longer needs to report on potions, inwardly teasing her for reporting to him just because she is the department head. When she asks about performance reports, Oscar says once a month is fine, prompting her to accuse him of slacking off. He explains he has more important work, like restoring lost magic reference books. Leaning back, Oscar muses that as a supposed unlucky genius, he can't just announce high-level theories himself. He decides to present his findings under the name of a respected mage with enough fame, status, and age. A cobweb-covered door creaks open in a dusty room. Ugh, a disheveled, green-haired man stretches as he emerges from the room. He straightens his uniform, a look of tired resolve on his face. 2 colleagues greet the man as Schwein, surprised to see him after 3 months and asking about his research. A caption introduces the White Tower's elder and theory mage, Schwein Koch, who tiredly confirms his return. At a table, Schwein despairs that his magic isn't manifesting for the festival, as his colleagues advise him not to rush his difficult research. As Schwein mutters about finding the right result value, his female colleague notes how hard it must be. His blonde colleague suggests getting an assistant, specifically recommending Oscar Crusian, which surprises Schwein. Schwein dismisses the idea with a HMPH, scoffing that Oscar is only level 2. Ahem. The colleague corrects him, explaining that was before, and that Schwein missed all the recent news while cooped up. The man asks if Schwein has noticed the change in the tower's atmosphere, and Schwein thoughtfully agrees. He notes that everyone looks much healthier and wonders if they won the lottery, to which his colleague replies that it's close enough. The colleague explains it's all thanks to Oscar's potential being unlocked, expressing what a shame it is that Schwein missed everything. Schwein listens, cautiously asking if this means Oscar is good at alchemy. His colleagues passionately correct him, exclaiming that Oscar is a genius at business and lecturing, far beyond a mere level 2. Whoa. Overwhelmed, Sveen agrees to meet Oscar, but tells him not to expect much. From this vantage point, everything changes dramatically. It concludes that even a genius's view is limited when they're only a level 2 mage. The Mage of all mages. The next card reveals the title belongs to the Archmage Oscar Sage. Back in the present, Oscar faces Schwein and confirms that he is indeed giving him a sudden test. Schwein formally introduces himself, stating his specialty in theoretical and lost magic. Oscar bows respectfully before the Elder. Oscar internally celebrates, realizing Elder Schwein is the perfect candidate to be the face of his research. Schwein expresses his apologies for testing Oscar when he's the one asking for help. Oscar smiles, saying it's natural for a researcher to verify someone's abilities, impressing Schwein with his mature attitude. Oscar declares he'll do his best, thinking that with Elder Schwein's backing, no one will question a level 2's research. He easily begins writing the solution, thinking a level 5 or 6 mage could solve this. As he writes, he deduces that Schwein must be stuck at the final revision stage, trying to find the mana values. Schwein watches intently as Oscar scribbles on the clipboard. He inwardly marvels at the speed of the young man, wondering how a level 2 is solving the test so quickly. As Oscar flips to the final page, Schwein is stunned, thinking such a feat is impossible without the mindset of a high-ranking mage. A sliver of doubt creeps in, and Schwein wonders if Oscar is just pretending to solve the problems out of frustration. But Oscar's pen moves with unwavering confidence, filling the page with complex formulas. A spark of recognition ignites in Oscar's eyes, as Schwein's gaze remains fixed on him. Oscar realizes this is his own creation, pleased to see it again, and wonders if the reference materials for it still exist. With a confident smile, Oscar hands the completed test back to Schwein, announcing that he's finished. Schwein accepts the test with a skeptical "good work," suspecting Oscar simply wrote an answer for the last question without solving it. Disappointed, Schwein laments that Oscar seemingly gave up on the most difficult question, dashing his hopes of seeing how he'd approach the research. His expectations, raised by his colleague's recommendation, fall flat until his eyes catch something on the paper that gives him pause. A jolt of shock runs through him as he realizes all the answers so far are correct. Leaning forward in disbelief, Schwein is floored, realizing Oscar performed mental calculations worthy of an academy professor, far beyond a mere level 2. Completely bewildered, Schwein holds up the paper and asks Oscar if he is truly confident in his answer to the final question. Oscar confirms he is, prompting Schwein to ask which of the 4 mana values he used in his solution. Looking over the formula, Oscar explains he used a fluid mana value and asks if his approach was wrong. Oscar elaborates that a unified mana value would cause errors, so he used a fluid one that adapts to the process, a solution that leaves Schwein trembling. His eyes wide with sudden, dawning hope, Schwein asks if he can immediately use Oscar's values to test the magic. A brilliant serpentine dragon of golden energy erupts into existence. How Schwein stammers in utter amazement at the sight, while Oscar stands calmly beside him. Overcome with joy, Schwein seizes Oscar's hand, declaring he'll be a co-author, not just an assistant, and Oscar gratefully accepts. Oscar, looking startled, asks if the magic they were researching was what he thinks it is, and Schwein confirms it. Schwein reveals with a triumphant smile that they have recovered the lost magic of the previous Tower Master Oscar Sage. The golden serpent coils through a starry void, identified as the legendary magic, Ouroboros. The radiant form of the Ouroboros drifts through the darkness of space. Its luminous scales trail through the cosmos, an endless loop of power. Oscar stares in stunned silence at the manifestation of his own forgotten creation. He inwardly questions why Schwein spent 7 years recovering a magic that defies mana conservation, a project he himself once undertook. The magic is revealed to be, in theory, a perfect source of infinite mana. From the dawn of time, humanity has yearned to conquer. Though humanity had conquered the land and the seas, they had yet to reach their final frontier, the sky. An airship flies beside the ethereal Ouroboros, a vision of what could be. A flashback shows a white-haired figure, Oscar Sage, whose goal was to conquer the sky through the Blue Sky Project. In a memory, Oscar Sage explains he created the Ouroboros magic as a power source for aircraft during the Demon War. However, the magic was ultimately insufficient to power an aircraft, and the ambitious project was discarded. Back in the present, Oscar muses that recovering the magic wasn't worth 7 years of effort if not for an aircraft. Schwein excitedly realizes the Tower Master must have started the delivery service to fund this research, leaving Oscar utterly baffled. Oscar internally despairs at Sasha for making him recover his own impractical magic, while Schwein tearfully praises him for fulfilling their shared dream. Schwein beams, looking at the fruit of their labor with pure admiration. Oscar asks if Schwein intends to repeat the past failure, and Schwein confirms Ouroboros will be the engine. Citing past records, Schwein agrees that Ouroboros' wind power, just by itself, could never power an aircraft. Schwein grins and gestures to a glowing lantern on the table, proudly declaring, "We have this." The glowing filament inside the lantern represents a new idea. Schwein explains that the light bulb is the key to magic engineering, a field that developed rapidly after the war. Oscar connects the dots, realizing Schwein's plan is to amplify Ouroboros' output with magic engineering to power an airship. Schwein clarifies that a battery will serve as the medium for the power increase, shocking Oscar. Schwein proposes using a battery that recharges with Ouroboros' wind to continuously increase the available mana. A nervous Oscar asks if the Golden Tower is aware of this groundbreaking research, and Schwein simply replies, no. Schwein reveals the Golden Tower finds airships absurd, as they are developing their own transportation method. Their project is an iron horse that endlessly rides the land, a new invention they call a train. Oscar considers this, acknowledging that the train will undoubtedly bring about its own paradigm shifts for humanity. However, a narrator muses, the train's impact will pale in comparison to the shock of an airship. Oscar has a flash of insight, realizing the Tower Master started the delivery business at a loss to monopolize the future sky market. Schwein agrees, confirming that current goods transport is limited to slow carriages and ships. As an airship soars through the clouds, he speaks of conquering the one frontier no one has ever reached. The scene lingers on the brilliant sky as Schwein's voice speaks of ushering in a new beginning. He reveals that his and the Tower Master's shared goal is to reveal the recovered Ouroboros at the White Night Festival. Oscar listens intently, looking deeply moved as he thanks the Elder. He thinks with resolve that as Sasha's master, it's his duty to pave the way for her. Schwein is visibly startled by Oscar's sudden, intense declaration. A confident smile plays on Oscar's lips as he focuses on their shared mission. Oscar argues that a real, tangible marvel is far more impactful than an abstract theory, and Schwein agrees. With that, Oscar offers to share some research materials, presenting a thick, bound ledger. Schwein takes the documents, asking what they are, as Oscar simply instructs him to read them. Schwein is stunned, recognizing the papers contain revolutionary formulas for a magic-engineered battery he's never seen. Eager to study the material, Schwein asks to sit down, and Oscar happily obliges. As he reads, Schwein is amazed by the thoroughness of the research, which even incorporates Ouroboros techniques. Thrilled, Schwein asks if they can begin research immediately, and Oscar confirms that is the plan. But Schwein's face falls, as he somberly states that it's not that simple. A confused Oscar asks for clarification, wondering why the Elder seems to be apologizing. Schwein gravely warns that upon announcing their success, the Golden Tower will stop at nothing to impede them, even resorting to violence. Oscar, however, just smiles, casually dismissing the threat as if it were nothing. Schwein insists Oscar is underestimating the danger, predicting lawsuits and even assassination attempts from their rivals. He admits to being afraid of the Golden Tower and fearing for his life. But he knows that if he gives in to fear, he will never accomplish anything. Standing with newfound resolve, Schwein declares that there is something he fears far more. He fears being forever scarred, unable to advance, and becoming an empty shell of his former self. He recounts the White Tower's powerlessness, losing markets and contracts to other towers, and always fearing the Golden Tower's reactions. Oscar smiles warmly, declaring that with that perspective, he's fine with any external dangers. His confidence makes Schwein laugh, though he admits it's strangely upsetting. Schwein extends his hand, ready to formalize their partnership. With a sense of purpose, he asks Oscar to work well with him moving forward. The two mages shake hands, sealing their pact to revolutionize the world. As they begin, Schwein immediately points out a problem with their work on the Ouroboros. He asks if the Weyler equation they've added is actually decreasing the magic output, and Oscar soberly agrees. A weary Schwein confirms the setback, sweating from the mental effort. Overwhelmed by papers, Schwein laments how hard it is to alter a masterpiece, but Oscar reassures him they are making progress. Oscar suggests a new approach, making the formation a parallel system for safety, an idea Schwein realizes is correct. Oh. A sudden spark of insight hits Oscar as he stands up from his chair. He starts to ask for more coffee but freezes mid-motion, prompting a weary Schwein to ask if it's another blackout. As the room plunges into darkness, Oscar notes the frequent outages and suggests they rest, offering to grab a triple shot. 6 days into their intense research, Schwein reflects on their progress. He admits to Oscar that without his help, he would never have been able to complete the research. Oscar deflects the praise, sincerely believing Schwein would have succeeded on his own eventually. Schwein chuckles, thanking him, but Oscar insists he's being genuine. Blink. Oscar confesses that he honestly thought announcing the airships would be too difficult. Schwein smiles gratefully, telling Oscar that, thanks to him, their dream is now within reach. As the lights flicker again, Oscar looks up, calling out to the elder with concern. Amidst a touching moment, Oscar jokes that the nonsensical mana power station makes their magic shine beautifully, and Schwein laughs in agreement. An announcement summons Mage Oscar Crusian to the Vice Tower Master's office, and Schwein encourages him to go. Schwein smiles, thinking that now it's his turn to be cool. In the Vice Tower Master's office, Oscar discusses the frequent blackouts, noting they occur almost every other day. The Vice Tower Master determines that the power plant's mana supply issues require slime cleaning, and Oscar volunteers for the job. The Vice Tower Master thanks him, explaining they lack the manpower to deal with the numerous slimes near the plant. Oscar agrees to go tomorrow at 9 a.m., instructed to meet a mage named Veronica at the tower entrance. Oscar internally groans, wondering why he needs a level 4 mage, Veronica Fricks, for a simple slime hunt. The Vice Tower Master explains that Veronica has been worried lately and suggests they might inspire each other, surprising Oscar. Bowing, Oscar accepts the mission, and the Vice Tower Master chuckles his thanks. Oscar realizes the slime mission is a pretense for him to advise Veronica, noting the Vice Tower Master's sharp wit. An irritated Veronica confronts Oscar, asking why he's late, while he tiredly greets her. Pointing out he's 5 minutes early, Oscar boards the carriage as Veronica curtly tells him to get in. The horse-drawn carriage departs, its wheels clopping on the stone path. Inside, Veronica sternly warns Oscar that their destination is not a lecture hall. Oscar confirms he knows they're going to the power plant, but Veronica asserts that she is in charge of the mission. She boasts of her superior field experience, telling him not to act like a teacher. A tense silence settles between Oscar and Veronica in the carriage. Oscar asks if she's tired, but she rebuffs him, saying she needs to sleep. He persists, asking if she's worried, which only irritates her further as she reminds him this isn't a lecture. Smiling, Oscar gently offers his help, suggesting she should take advantage of the opportunity. Ugh. Veronica turns away, exasperated by his forwardness. She remains silent with her arms crossed, stewing in her annoyance. Oscar imagines himself patiently offering a treat to a wary cat. Veronica quietly admits to herself that her recent insomnia is because of a certain bastard. She recalls sleepless nights of training, infuriated that she couldn't imitate someone's technique. She realizes the difficult questions she faced weren't just teaching, but compensation for her lack of sleep. Snapping out of her thoughts, she asks Oscar what he meant, just as he mentally succeeds in luring the cat. Smothering a laugh, Oscar realizes she took the bait and correctly guesses her slump is due to his last class on mana temperament. Veronica confirms she's struggling to replicate Elder Maxim's wind, and Oscar bluntly states that it's an obvious problem. He tells her that kind of wind doesn't suit her, but she defensively insists it's what she's always aimed for. Oscar suggests an outside perspective is more accurate, and asks what kind of wind she thinks he wields. Haha, he reveals his wind is known for being warm, which she scoffs at, claiming she's never heard of it. HMPH. Oscar clarifies he's speaking of the past, finding it fascinating that others perceive him as warm when he doesn't. He reiterates that Veronica wants a strong, hot wind, but she doesn't seem warm to him. He advises her to find the wind that is most like her, leaving her to ponder his words. HMPH. She retorts that by his logic, his wind should be annoying, not cozy, and he laughingly agrees. They arrive at the mana power station, and Oscar stretches with a groan. Looking up, Oscar is momentarily confused by what he sees. He watches as Veronica is already mid-cast, confronting a large slime at the facility. Key-ass slime screeches as it's struck by Veronica's powerful magic. Oscar is impressed, realizing why his younger self praised her incredible high-speed chanting and acceleration magic. He watches her rapidly cast Wind Press, noting her speed rivals a level 5 mage. Oscar is reminded of Majiro Wilson, the White Tower's wisdom tank, famous for his 8 shots of Wind of Love. As Oscar considers turning Veronica into a mage like Majiro, she angrily confronts him for slacking off. HMPH, Oscar reluctantly agrees to help, joining the fight as she warns him the slimes are gathered at the entrance. As he magically grabs the slime, Oscar finds it suspicious that they're all clustered near the entrance. He continues to fight, pondering the strange behavior of the slimes. Veronica yells at Oscar to focus on the outside, but he points out that something feels very wrong. Oscar notes the slimes are all moving towards the entrance, as if trying to escape the power station. He explains that their lack of intelligence makes them utterly faithful to their strongest instinct, survival. Veronica scoffs at the idea of a monster inside, but decides they should go check anyway. As she moves to go, Oscar stops her with a burst of magic, reminding her not to order him around outside of class. The scene shifts to the chaotic energy swirling inside the power room. They discover a massive glowing cocoon, and Oscar identifies it as belonging to a white silkworm. Oscar explains that this type of silkworm moth, known as a silkworm of the skies, ingests mana to survive. He reasons that it crawled to the power station for its abundant mana, as a nervous Veronica asks if it has hatched yet. Veronica realizes the cocoon, not the slimes, is the source of the power disruption and asks if destroying it will solve the problem. Oscar confirms, but delivers a mix of good and bad news. The cocoon itself is not dangerous, but he needs to deliver the bad news next. The bad news is that newly hatched white silkworms are ravenous and devour every living thing around them, though Veronica thinks they just need to bring an elder before it hatches. Oscar grimly points out that the fleeing slimes and the sound of the cocoon breaking mean its metamorphosis is almost complete. He tells a startled Veronica to prepare for a fight. The cocoon bursts open, revealing a gigantic, radiant moth. Heck, someone lets out a terrified scream. Veronica covers her eyes, disgusted by the moth, but Oscar warns they can't run or it will attack a nearby city. Ugh, resigned, Veronica agrees they must stop it here. Ugh. Stepping forward, Veronica tells Oscar to step back, much to his amusement. Impressed that she's trying to protect him, Oscar begins casting a message spell for help. He sends the spell, hoping the horseman is nearby to receive it and call for reinforcements. The spell successfully activates, sending out the call for help. Veronica defiantly unleashes a wind press, taunting the massive insect. Key? The moth screeches as the powerful wind spell slams into it. Veronica prepares another attack, unleashing her jet booster magic. Then, I'm coming, she declares, launching herself forward with a fierce grin. Her attack is suddenly interrupted. Fuck what, she cries out, as an unseen force, which Oscar identifies as wind, throws her back. Oscar reaches out a hand, a faint glow emanating from it. He warns Veronica that touching the silkworm's corrosive feces will instantly melt her. Veronica realizes the intelligent insect must have left an opening on purpose. The moth flutters its wings, observing them. Back on the ground, Veronica asks how he saw the invisible powder, and Oscar explains he focused mana into his eyes to see every particle. Veronica stares in disbelief, wondering how that's possible, as Oscar smirks confidently. Key! The moth interrupts with a screech, as Oscar confirms that his technique is indeed possible. As the moth charges a massive energy beam, Oscar quickly tells Veronica to raise a windshield. He promises to teach her how he sees mana later as the beam fires. The powerful energy blast collides with their hastily erected shield. Exhausted, Oscar realizes he's already used 70% of his mana just to block that one attack, and won't survive another. His only relief is knowing the creature has a 5-minute cooldown before its next attack. He tells Veronica they have 5 minutes to end this, but she just looks confused. She looks down in shock to see a bleeding wound on her leg. She realizes a fragment from the moth's ray must have pierced the windshield. Injured, she tells Oscar to go on without her, insisting she can buy him some time. As he remains motionless, she desperately yells for him to leave so they don't both die. The air around her trembles with her pained resolve. Oscar gently reassures the terrified Veronica, promising he will never leave her behind. He stands, preparing himself for the next move. He activates Accelerate, Knowing he only has 28% of his mana remaining, he steels himself, determined to end the fight in a single, decisive blow. With focused intensity, Oscar gathers his remaining power for a final attack. Key. As the moth screeches, Veronica furiously asks how the crazy bastard plans to fight it. With a tear in her eye, she angrily reminds him that she told him to escape. Oscar's hand glows with power, as he thinks it's a good thing he brought a certain item with him. He launches himself into the air, flying directly at the moth, which lets out a confused screech. Key? Flipping upside down, Oscar reveals a high-tech gun, remaining completely calm as Veronica watches in shock.